12 miles below. By Mark Arrows. Chapter 121 to 130. Book 3, Chapter 30, Trap Triggered. Objectively, the most rational course of action would be to hand over whatever Tuekar wanted. It's hard to argue with taking an easy way out over fighting a murderous killing machine that takes an entire team of deathless to put down. Especially if said killing machine would go right after my head the moment the fight starts, since he's got Kidra as a backup. On the other hand, I can't tell him everything that happened. Not to mistake my intentions here, I don't hold unquestioning loyalty to Tsuya. We've met exactly once, and it also didn't help that she was perfectly willing to murderize me as a regrettable cost of business. Not the best first impression. The problem wasn't Tsuya. It was Kathita. The old bat had grown on me, and despite Journey's emulation not exactly being her, I still felt indebted and honor-bound to complete her own dying task at some point. Was I willing to wager my life on that, though? Hopefully, I won't need to answer that question anytime soon. So long as he doesn't start asking questions about what happened after the bunker, should be fine. I'm open to negotiations, I said. Assuming you let us go unharmed. Tuekar watched me, as if expecting deception. Then he seemed to almost relax, standing back up to his full height. That was surprisingly easier than expected. The spear flicked back up, twirling around his hand until he slammed it down into the ground and let go. The metal hand of floating shards extended out to me, a request. Hand over all recordings, and I'll be on my way. I shook my head. Don't have any. The relic armors deleted everything it heard, and Tsuya herself made sure anything else was gone. Only got my memory to go on. You need to ask your questions. He tugged, hand curling back. Annoying. I suppose there's little a human like you can do about it. How convenient for you. The feather shrugged, rubbing the bridge of his nose in irritation. So be it. Tell me the encounter with Tsuya in detail. She wanted to apologize to me for setting off explosives that I got caught in. Said that the bunker was no longer something she cared to keep secret since we'd already stumbled on it. Before she got to any real requests, Atius interrogated her to find out more things on Relinquished. He got a little heated with her. He made demands of that witch. The feather laughed, grinning. Her own pet barking and biting? No one to blame but herself. He threatened he'd cut off the connection if she didn't comply. The feather grinned. I always liked that deathless. He's the only one of his kind with a spine to stand up to me. Rare quality. You're very much like him too, although with far less to back it up. Everyone else is so boring, with all the screaming and running. He tugged in disgust. And the questions? What did that dog ask of that bitch? Mostly who she was and why the world was the way it was. He also wanted to know more about the new generation of deathless. Got interrupted by Relinquished after that. Tuekar scoffed. Those cowards aren't worth even paying attention to. At least standard deathless stand and fight once they're cornered. The new generation? Trash. Did he truly waste his time asking such tripe? You know about them? I innocently asked. Inverted quality for quantity for this generation. The lowest Tsuya will go to, it's ridiculous. The process is now indiscriminate, no quality control at all. Women, children, elderly, soldiers and weaklings. Dredges one and all, unfit to even wield a blade, let alone the title. Most held on to past memories, what a mistake that was. Many don't even care to fight and hide away, pretending that nothing's changed. The ones that do embrace who they've become grow warped. Free of any consequences, your kind falls into depravity. Immortality is not a weight most human minds can suffer through. The spear flicked out, the metal hand grabbing hold of the shaft. I suppose the little golden goddess has truly grown desperate. Perhaps she hoped among the rabble someone of worth might appear? She should know better. Empower all the ants she wants, not a single one can survive being squashed by a thumb. But I didn't come here to answer your questions. Continue. That's basically it. I lied. There's a reason I'm not trying to hoard this info. Nothing of actual weight was said before Relinquished showed up and put a stop to all of it. Tuekar frowned, eyes narrowing. You're lying to me, Winterscar. I can tell from your voice. The spear tip swung again dangerously, a threat. Did you think I wouldn't notice? On hindsight, maybe trying to lie to a machine wasn't the smartest idea. I needed to come up with something more convincing, because I found myself oddly unwilling to tell him about the mission Cathita had undertaken, despite the risks of a full-blown fight brewing at the cost. It just didn't feel right. Relinquished showed up before anything important happened, I'm not lying on that. Atius was too focused on getting his answers first before the goddess could come to her point. I did get to ask a question to her. I said, stalling. And that question was. I had an idea to handle the lying aspect, but I'd need my armor in on it. The issue is that Tuekar could overhear under my helmet. He'd done that before, so I needed to figure out a way to talk to Journey directly. Get the armor on board with what I needed without actually saying anything. Sign language behind my back? No, he'd probably learned it by now, and I doubt I could hide that behind my back. A possible answer dawned on me. Some more secure method of getting what I want from Journey. Into the soul fractal I dove, and from there, I poked at Journey's own soul fractal, prodding the relic armor's spirit. The connection took, and once more I felt its essence, thoughts and feelings interchanged. It was tense, worried, alert, anxious. There was great danger before it, and apprehension. Fear. Not for itself, but for me. That I would be killed here. Unexpected intrusion, define directive. I sent it a message through my soul. Modulate my voice so that the lie detector isn't tripped. Affirmative. It sent back. Preparing module. The question I had for Tsuya was a little off the cuff. I asked her if my father was alive or dead. I said, back in reality, she said he might have survived. On the side of my HUD, I saw a small progress bar flicker into life. It was filling up quickly. Tuekar paused, that remaining eye flashing bright violet for a moment. Your father was it? And you asked a god about that? Humans die all the time, why this? Well, it was important to me at the time and I was drugged up to the gills not thinking exactly straight. He frowned, that single eye starting to look at me with a more baleful glare. Do you have anything of value? Or did you ask how many toes she had on her personal avatar? My patience is thinning. The loading bar was at 70%. I needed to stall a little bit longer. Hey now, I said, hands raised up placating. Feet fetishes are very common. Don't look down on those folks. 70%. Not saying I'm one of those degenerates, that worship feet. But a goddess's feet would probably be the best feet to war. The feather outright growled at me, spear slicing through the ground in front of him, out of frustration. A line of blue cut into the granite, a promise of impending violence. Do you have a death wish? Is your sense of self-preservation faulty? Tell me what she told you. Now. You left that bunker with a golden orb, I saw it bounce by your feet. What was it? 80%. I had to trust Journey would come through for me. Right, the golden orb. The golden orb we found inside the bunker, that golden orb, yes. 90%. I'm just remembering it right now, had all kinds of funny patterns floating around it. Very imperial looking, no doubt. Also in some kind of capsule. 100%. Module ready. The feather snarled, taking one step forward. I took a step back, hands up, cowering slightly. Okay, okay. She said it was an older attempt to attack Relinquished with, and we needed to deliver it to the first imperial priest we could find. They'll know what to do with it. I left it up on the surface buried under some snow on the northwest, exactly 10 miles off the colony site. Had it been enough? There was an oddity in my voice. I heard myself talking, but something else was being projected out the helmet's speakers. Just a slight reverb that overshadowed my own voice. I could hardly tell the difference. I held my breath. Tuekar watched, eyebrows narrowing down over his ruined face. The eye closed. Then opened again, and I knew I'd fucked up. Do you really think I wouldn't notice a voice modulation, Winterscar? Congratulations, I can't tell if you are lying or not, but I can tell you are covering something. It seems in the end I still need to squash you all under my thumb after all, rip that helmet off your head and negotiate the only way you hairless apes understand. The spear twirled again, and he struck down into the ground. With violence. A cold pulsed across the spear, and chunks of rock exploded out before him in a massive torrent. Dust expanded out of the pulverized stone, instantly obscuring the battlefield. Journey auto-compensated the visual field a moment later, just enough time to spot a spear tossed straight through, right at our chest. Cathita reacted instantly, hands drawing out her blades just in time to block. Following right behind was Tuekar himself, snatching the weapon and slamming it down into the ground again, a cold pulsing through the broken cracks, sending the rocks flying up again and clouding the battlefield. My armor dodged the damage by jumping over the shockwave, which was exactly what the feather hoped for, since he sent a wave of occult arcing out from his spear, sending us flying backwards a distance away. My own knights charged right for the feather at the same moment, occult blades in hand. Tuekar didn't pay them attention. From the scattered dust, the chosen knights lumbered out to intercept Captain Sagrius and the rest of the Winterscar knights. Occult pulsed across the feather and he vanished, reappearing right before me, spear striking out casually to skewer me in the chest. Cathida and I both struck back, my own occult spells pooling together. Speed-wise, Tuekar was simply on a different level, avoiding, ducking or deflecting every attack while striking back. The lack of his right hand to use limited attack openings from his side, but somehow he still wove them in with that oversized spear, making use of his feet whenever he could as a spacing tool, or to throw off our attacks. Or playing it more meticulously safe this time around, attacking only when the strike was guaranteed and Cathida would be unable to safely retaliate. Damage started piling up on Journey, as both of us were forced back, barely keeping it together. The chosen knights on the other hand were not doing as well against my own knights. They certainly matched the speed of the knights, but didn't surpass any. Armor was still hard locked to prevent serious damage to the user. No matter how fast Tuekar moved his puppets by whatever chip he'd implanted into their nervous system, they were still unable to go past their limits. Which meant it was swordsmanship against swordsmanship. And on that front, my knights were holding the advantage, slowly breaking down the enemy. My own fight was frantic up until Tuekar let me take a breath to recover, taking a few steps back and resetting the fight. I could see the hollow parts of his body, through all the tears and battle damage, glowing red hot. The air above his head shimmered, the halo resting just above. Journey, I said, reaching to the armor across the soul bridge. Rockerai, second form. Overclock the system. See if we can use that strike to open him up for a Nightbreaker round. Danger. The armor returned. This unit was not designed for overclocking systems. I know that. But we're already deep in the shit now as is, might as well go full tilt right off the start. Cathida shrugged, taking a new stance with her long swords while Tuekar watched on from a few paces afar. Oh! Another trick, Winterscar, he said. I don't recognize that stance. Some other ancient secret technique you plumbed out of whatever hole your ancestors found? You think that'll save you? Behind, the chosen knights were holding off my own knights, the sound of clashing blades becoming background noise. Something like that, the Crusader said, and then struck. The lighting style was really made to abuse the speed of the Winter Blossom technique. But predictably, the feather could match that speed. A cold pulsed around my armor, and I joined in the flurry as well, striking down with 3 back-to-back spectral mirrors, each wielding a blade, each attacking in the blind points of that move. The feather didn't even flinch, grinning instead. His spear flipped into position, shield flaring on the shaft as he took Cathida's first blade and let her blade edge slip down the shaft. The wide defense caught one of my own spectral blades, but 2 more had been thrown out from an angle the spear couldn't block. He allowed a glancing hit on his torso from Cathida's second blade, in exchange for letting him sweep his leg up, and stomp downwards on the broadside of the blade. It crashed into the ground and snapped in half as he forced his full weight down into it. The Winterscar blade instantly flickered off. A regular occult blade would have continued to function on the broken blade edge, but these blades were made of carbon fiber, and only the outline was metal. The moment he'd snapped the whole thing, the metal contact broke. That was a flaw I should probably amend for the next prototype. Down one sword. But not out of the game yet. My own attacks approached his exposed torso in that sliver of time. 2 spectral blades, each a mirror image of the Winterscar swords and just as lethal. His single working hand let go of his spear, the floating metal bits starting to shine bright occult blue. On each digit's edge. I realized immediately what he'd done. Why his left hand was made of floating metal bits in the first place. That wasn't only a hand. None of that had been decoration like the rest of his gear. Each of those fingers were tiny occult blades. With the speed of a monster, the clawed fingers struck downwards, catching both my own mirror blades, dissipating each in the strike. From there, he reached out for our chest plate next, 5 occult blade digits outstretched, like talons. Heat surged through Journey's armor, instantly getting caught inside the temperature-controlled innards and leaking out onto my skin. Kathida expertly backed us a step away, drawing out our rifle in the same motion, Nightbreaker loaded and pointing down range, point blank. A cold flared around Tuekar's body for a moment and he vanished. Kathida didn't fire, either because she'd already calculated that he'd make a getaway, or that she was using the threat of the weapon as a means of preventing his attack. With my occult sight, I saw exactly where the feather reappeared. Right by his discarded spear. His leg knocked the weapon back into his hand. He twirled it into a throwing position along with his body, all in one fluid motion, and then launched it like a javelin. A cold pulsed across his arm. The spear vanished right as it left his hand, causing a small shockwave of dust to flare out where the spear should have been. Deep into the soul sight, where I saw the concept of a spear vanish, another one appeared. Behind. I shouted through the soul bridge, not trusting my own voice to be fast enough, and Kathida heard me just in time to twist and deflect the incoming weapon. It was a catch-22. Block the spear, and open our back to the enemy. Or block the enemy and open our back to the spear. Tuekar loomed behind us, having already cleared the distance, that hand of floating occult blades outstretched. I've seen what my Nightbreakers did. Force multiplication by surface area was utterly devastating when it came to the occult. The hand opened up, reaching to grab the back of our neck. 5 occult blades worth of damage. In his nearly broken eye, I saw only death and hatred. He wasn't planning on keeping us alive anymore. Glowing fractals edged across Journey's armor glimmered further into life as I triggered each. A nearly invisible shimmer appeared into reality, the dome just wide enough to intercept the unpowered palm of Tuekar's hand and halt its progress. Bits of his fingers were stopped by proxy, the invisible force holding them in suspension limited in range without the palm to follow through. I felt the weight in my mind crush me against a wall and the occult dome nearly winked out from the sheer kinetic energy. I held my ground and shoved back with everything I had. It wasn't nearly enough. His nail tips were still in range, scratching into Journey's armor, while the rest of the surface area wouldn't make it. But I didn't need perfection. I just needed to avoid death by a hair. Journey had seen it exactly as I'd hoped and refrained from wasting its shield. The fingertips brushed through the armor, slicing without resistance, in, and out. Too far away from my spine. A cold pulsed around my armor as the mirror fractal again lit up deep inside. His hand instantly retreated, forced away to defend against 2 mirror strikes, battering them like annoyances. Kathida's own blade flipped in her hand, and she struck backwards under her armpit, in a quick jab. He stepped away to avoid it, giving her enough time to fully turn and stab properly. The blade dove straight for his torso, and he made no move to avoid it. Instead, his clawed hand shot straight down. Right where the hilt of our blade would be in moments, no, our wrist. That deadly hand opening up to grasp. I realized the checkmate. He didn't need to hit anything vital. All he needed to do was grab hold of Journey in any location to drain the shields. The wrist would do just fine. He could outtrade us easily, 5 blades against 1. But Kathida was still overclocking her systems right now, and she could think just as fast as he could. She let go of the sword, letting it loose in the air. Tuekar's hand instantly shifted midway, from targeting the wrist to diving for the hilt of the weapon. Between breaking my shields or disarming me for good, Tuekar calculated disarming me would be the safest move in that fragment of an instant. His hand cut straight through the blade, breaking the weapon for good, and putting itself right in the way for Kathida's hand to wrap around his own wrist in a tight lock. Tuekar snarled, lifting his hand up, and us with it. Kathida stubbornly didn't let go. Her right hand drew the rifle down range, pointed straight at his chest, all while she held his arm in place. I saw the violet eye narrow. Kathida pressed the trigger. Almost the same instant, Tuekar's leg shot up, slapping the rifle tip off course, where the Nightbreaker round exploded out into the world, narrowly missing his face by a few inches and flying off in a strange lopsided course. The kick had been so quick and devastating, it hadn't simply put the rifle in an odd direction. It ripped the weapon in half, caught between the grip of a relic armor and the full might of a pissed-off feather. Keith! I heard Kathida yell over the speakers, already letting go of the ruined weapon. I knew what I had to do. Tuekar had thought we'd been disarmed with both our blades broken and the Nightbreaker round wasted. But with her free hand, Kathida had reached down to the boot, and grabbed the hilt of her reserve dagger. With every bit of focus I could muster, 4 mirror blades appeared from that hand, each lifting a copy of that dagger, and diving straight for the enemy. Tuekar swung us straight down into the ground, trying to dislodge us like gunk stuck on his arm. Rock and stone were pulverized as Journey's shields flared against the hit, but compared to an occult blade, this was nothing the armor couldn't handle. In the meantime, my attacks continued their path straight for his body, all while Cathita held a death grip on him, stopping him from dodging more. He tried to force an attack through anyhow, but the relic armor was strong enough to slow his movements to a crawl. The only offense he had was one free foot, which he used to kick at my mirror images, expertly avoiding the blade edges and hitting the malformed arms instead. It was working until I started pulsing my images in parallel to one another instead of consecutively. He snarled, as 4 daggers stabbed into him, vanishing a moment after from my inability to keep them manifested in the world, but not before they dealt their full damage. "You worm!" he screamed, again lifting us up and slamming us down again, and then dragging us against the ground. "Get off me!" We were swung into a stone hexagonal pillar, completely crushing through it. And then swung up into the air, and then brought back down into the ground. Cathita didn't listen, instead she slammed the dagger into his arm viciously the entire time, even while we were clobbered through the pillar. His shield triggered, and held the blade in check. I joined in on the onslaught, stabbing again and again as fast as I could flash through the occult spell. Desperate to break that feather's shield once and for all. Unable to do anything else, Tuekar's free leg lifted and slammed down on my shoulder parallel to Cathita's death grip, and then pressed, trying to pry Cathita's arm off his own. The old bat on her part, took the change in stance as an invitation to slam her dagger into Tuekar's chest, audibly snarling herself as the weapon crackled against the feather's shields, slowly breaking through by sheer strength, sparks of all kinds flying in all directions. I stopped trying to time my images to attack all at the same time, instead going for straight quantity, stabbing out as much as I could, as fast as I could. Journey's superstructure groaned, bits of metal starting to crush downwards from the monster's foot. In my soul sight, I could see the armor compress, crushing internally bit by bit as tolerances were breached. All while Cathita continued to savagely hold the knife against the fizzling shield, occult mirror strikes flashed all over, many malformed in my haste, but the majority living long enough to get a bit of damage in. How powerful were a feather's fucking shields in the first place? This was already 3 times the damage a regular relic armor could sustain. Tuekar's own hand thrashed around, trying to grab anything it could like a dying beast, but Cathita refused to let go, keeping the angle just right so that he couldn't reach with the fingertips. The feather's shield continued to crackle against the blades. Parts of Journey's armor fractured and broke apart, flying off and revealing parts of my arm under it, metal ligaments holding tightly and snapping away one by one. I could almost feel the structural integrity of the arm going past critical. A few seconds was all we had left. He screamed and pushed harder, further denting the imprint of his foot into my shoulder armor. It was too late. The feather's shields finally broke. Cathita's dagger dug into his chest without hesitation, twisted and slashed outwards, cutting a deep gash through the feather. The second hit, he barely avoided by twisting his entire torso, letting the stab graze over his chest. She went right for his throat next, but his foot finally pried us loose, the relic armor giving out as too many ligaments had critically failed under pressure. The whole thing snapped, and power faded from the gauntlet holding onto the feather's hand. Tuekar didn't waste a moment of freedom and kicked us. "Far, far away. Now you've gone and done it," he snarled, walking in our direction, feet knocking the discarded spear back into his hand. His body twitched for a moment before he resumed his pace. "Congratulations SSSS, Winterscar. You've officially made it to the top of my most hated list. Let me hand you your prize." I could see warning notifications all over my HUD. Journey had taken a severe beating. The arm was completely out of order. Heat was venting off the newfound openings, coming out as a haze and vapor in the air. The spear struck us like a hammer, right on my head. Journey's shields turned on to take the impact, but it sent us reeling backwards. Another 2 hits came down, one hitting my stomach and bending me over, the second following through and launching us into the air again before we hit the ground. Shields were being drained fast. No weapons, except for our dagger. And 1 arm down. Father had fought with these odds once. And he hadn't made it. Tuekar took a moment, glaring down at us, his own body venting out heat. Then, that single eye flashed with surprise. He twirled around, looking straight up the cliffside. A clan knight had leaped above him from the higher ground, silently falling down directly at him. A knight I didn't recognize as part of the crew I'd come here with, because that wasn't a Winterscar. No, the colors and armor pointed to House Resolution, a minor house who had a single relic armor to their name. He must have been from that second group, the one that the clan lord had sent to tail me. The one that was supposed to be tied up with the rest of the chosen knights. As he soared down he held two active weapons. In one hand, the silver and violet blade that had killed clan lord Atius. In the other, an old gold and steel blade, Breaker, the clan lord's personal sword. Both of these swords were capable of cutting through more than just matter. He hurled Lord Atius's long sword with an expert cast. But not at the machine. The old imperial sword sunk into the ground right before me, a cold edge cutting through with no resistance until the hilt prevented the sword from completely sinking. Cathida reached out, and yanked it out of the ground with our working arm. It remained lit, inscriptions on the side of the blade still clearly polished. Old as the sword was, it had been well maintained. I realized Drass's gambit. She'd brought weapons to kill a feather. The second group had likely either survived the counter-ambush and were on their way here, or they'd held their ground and bought this night enough time to race to the signal Drass had given me, carrying the weapons we needed to cut the head of the snake for good. House Resolution's knight showed no fear across that faceless helmet as he fell straight into the jaws of death. His now free hand reached behind his back and drew out a Nightbreaker round. Not the rifle, not the grenade launcher, no, the round itself. The crazy bastard triggered it right there and then as he fell, the chain spilling out, activating, cutting two of his fingers off, and slicing through parts of his armor by accident despite his best attempts to keep the dangerous thing as far away to his side as possible. Occult chains were stupidly dangerous, just as likely to maim the wielder as the enemy, hence why I'd set up grenade launchers for them. Let it do its thing away from the user. The clan knight had clearly prepared himself for a suicide run. Somehow, he held onto the occult round, bleeding fingers never letting it go. He landed with a heavy crack against the ground, relic armor flaring out its shield for a moment, occult chains flapping down and cutting into the ground as well. Helmet looking up, just in time to see the feather's spear, speeding down right at him. Occult pulsed. But not from Tuekar. 12 perfectly formed mirror images stepped out from the knight's landing position. Like pale blue wraiths brought back from death itself. The mirror fractal. There's only one person I know that could use the mirror fractal with that level of competence. Someone I realized had played us all this whole time, waiting for the enemy to scurry out into the light of false security. Counterintelligence he'd called it once. Violet eye widened in surprise. Tuekar aborted his attack, instantly spearing out in the defense as the wraiths surrounded him. It was too late, and too many. Each lunged forward. Each struck at the same time. And each wielded a replica Nightbreaker, copied from the one he held active at his side. 48 occult chains raced for the feather, from all directions, like a death trap from the maw of hell itself. Book 3, Chapter 31, Choke. 48 ghostly occult chains raced forward, unavoidable, flailing around and clashing against each other in the race for the feather's throat. One image had even leaped above, the ghost chains lashing out in anticipation of the feather jumping up to escape. In any other situation, that would have been the end of Tuekar. Body slashed away, only a head left behind to yell at us, if he were lucky. But the feather didn't need luck. He had the occult. Tuekar didn't bother with theatrics, not when his life was on the line. Occult pulsed around him and he vanished, reappearing further away. The mirror images all struck, clashing against each other at the center point, dissipating into fading clouds. Clan Lord Atius walked through the fading mist, taking his helmet off and tossing it aside. A demigod had little need for a helmet. I see you've been holding out on your abilities. He said. How unfortunate to find out now. I see you're not as dead as you should be. The feather snarled back, damage sparking through the ribcage from the dagger blows, still multiplying his voice at odd sections. Fortunately, I will rectify that shortly, believe me. Drass had always stressed that she was only a temporary clan lord each time I met her. In addition to her iron conviction that the feather would be dealt with. Atius must have been in contact with her this whole time, assuming he really had faked his own death, working in the background free of any eyes. In hindsight, I'm not sure why I hadn't questioned the odd death, considering how in-depth the clan lord went when it came to counterintelligence. Even against two assassins, he'd have them both killed within minutes using occult powers. And then he'd have all the time in the world to set up the rest. He must have seen it like a gift from above, falling on his lap. Around us, the fighting was still at a fever pitch. The Winterscar knights were occupied with Tuekar's controlled knights. The only advantage the Chosen had was their unnatural coordination with one another. Something my own knights were slowly adapting and overcoming. The result of that war was almost inevitable. Captain Sagrius was leading, organizing the knights into chipping away at the Chosen. It was only a matter of time until the Chosen knights made a mistake, wiping them out. Atius, I said, hobbling to regroup by his side. Plan. He gave a cautious glance, keeping his eyes fixed on Tuekar. Never seen him this broken down before, lad. Well done indeed. Never seen him use a teleport ability either. You've rattled extra snow out of him. Tuekar scoffed. Minor battle damage. The Deathless raised an eyebrow at that. You have no shields. It changes nothing. Insects cannot defeat a god. He screamed back, growing unhinged. Atius ignored his jab, turning slightly to me, almost as if scheming in the open. Cornered animals fight the hardest. Play it safe, we'll grind him down instead. Maybe we'll get his other arm cut now that we're armed for it. He lifted his head, a malicious grin pointed at the feather. Wouldn't that be something, old friend? The feather growled, challenge me all you wish. Your life is measured in hours. He crouched, a cold pulsing around before he leaped forward, ripping the pillar he stood on into parts. Halfway in his leap, he vanished. Atius's eyes flashed a cold blue, then widened in surprise. He twisted and delivered a kick directly into my chest, throwing me back. Not a moment too soon. Tuekar emerged from an occult portal, slashing through where I'd been a moment ago. The spear twirled, and he struck out against the Deathless in a seamless movement. No images came from Atius, instead he fought with both the Wild Nightbreaker round in tandem with the machine sword. I recognized the spell he was using as one he'd listed in the data he'd left behind. Eyes glowing occult blue, leaving trails behind as he moved. At this moment, Atius was seeing hundreds of futures, showing him the optimal path to victory. And more importantly, the Nightbreaker chain seemed to almost move according to his will, with the Deathless being able to handpick the best way to swing and pull back with the wild weapon. They slashed and snapped with each strike, lashing at the feather. Tuekar did not remain in place. Instead, he leaped around using the occult every few seconds, keeping himself on the run to maintain speed. It seemed to travel with him, jump after jump, his speed staying constant despite the dozens of directions he struck out. At a distance, he'd launch his spear out like a javelin, sending it through an occult portal to strike out at the Deathless from unexpected angles, to which he'd appear at the ending path to recover the weapon, either leaping away again, or continuing the assault if the occult chains weren't in the way. Keith. Atius called out, sprint forward, left side, attack the air now. I followed orders without hesitation. Dutifully sprinting forward and striking out blindly into the air using the borrowed blade on my left. Tuekar emerged from the occult at the same moment, hand reaching out to grab his incoming spear, only to completely abort the movement the instant he spotted my blade swinging straight at his unshielded throat. His occult spear flew wide past him, as he was forced into a duck, low to the ground. My blade cut right through the metal halo and the tip of his shoulder tower, slicing them both, breaking the halo and damaging the shield. Atius was already leaping onto the feather, Nightbreaker round held in his hand far away to his side, eyes fading away as the occult spell ended. But that left him free to use the rest of his powers. Another dozen mirror images appeared, each swinging the replica Nightbreaker chains at the feather, all crashing down on him. Tuekar scrambled away, kicking hard at the ground in order to rocket backwards, leaving a crater behind him where the rest of Atius's image crashed down on, slicing the ground into chunks before fading. The feather didn't stop, retreating all the way to the back, yanking his impaled spear from a pillar it had sunk deep into and jumping high up on top. Heat wave rippled around his frame. That single eye glaring down at us with unmistakable hatred. Then it widened. I've just realized something, Winterscar. He said, sounding almost gleeful for some reason. That's not something I like to hear. But the longer we keep him occupied, the more time we buy for my knights to wrap up the Chosen and for Atius's own group to arrive. With that many knights, all wielding the Winter Blossom technique and armed to the teeth, even Tuekar wouldn't be able to escape us. I've wasted my time trying to break into these armors of yours before I gave up and took control of the human users inside. I've just realized that my time wasn't wasted. He outright seemed to leer at me now. There's a reason he made the default settings as they are. And there's a reason he didn't allow random users to mess with the administration settings. Allow me to demonstrate exactly why. My HUD flickered, and then fuzzed for a moment, almost freezing. A dozen error messages began to appear all over the interface. Before I could even ask what was going on, my movement locked up, the armor taking command. My stance was forced to relax, as the armor made me to stand straight. He's got control of my suit. I yelled out as loudly as I could. Atius got the message, instantly delivering another relic-powered kick into my stomach and sending me flying away, far outside of any range I could do damage from. Tuekar shrugged from his perch. As if I need help in killing you, Atius. The feather turned to me, waving his spear in a vague order. As for you, why don't you go walk off and die alone somewhere, if you would be so kind. The armor stood up, brushed imaginary dirt off, and sheathed my sword with a cheeky pat on the hilt. Then, it turned, and marched off with me trapped inside it, helpless. The only reason I hadn't gone into complete panic was the soul fractal. It was still active, as were all my other fractals. Whatever Tuekar had done, he'd only taken over the remote override. I reached out to Journey's soul fractal and tried to get to the bottom of this. Panic. Despair. They crashed into me like a wave, overwhelming me for a moment until I snapped back to focus. Unable to override administrator commands. It said to my probing. Administrator commands? Can't I order a counter command? Middleware attack detected. All commands from the user are being intercepted. Unable to purge virus. Journey walked us out of the battlefield, step by step. Hexagonal pillars on all sides began to obscure the world, but the armor pressed on, following deeper into the path. Behind me, I could hear the crashing of occult blades again, the fight between Deathless and Feather resuming, Tuekar not giving Atius any time. Eventually we reached a cliff of some kind, and Journey came to a stop. Its working arm slowly rose up, and then unhooked my helmet and lifted it off before casually tossing it down into the abyss. The soul fractal I'd been inhabiting inside the helmet faded away, and my spirit snapped back into my body. Vision and color returned to my eyes, as the occult sight vanished. The soul sight had a long range, but everything beyond that range was simply chaos that I couldn't understand. I'd seen the edge of the cliff we'd walked to, and nothing under it. Up until my eyes were opened and I saw the true sight of where we were. Under me was a mile-long drop. And before me, was a massive ecosystem. A forest of red trees, stretching across the land before me, broken up by larger granite blocks with glowing blue machinery inside. Above, there were 3 sources of sunlight, each fading into a red glow of sunset. From here, I could see the underground world with such clarity. It all knocked me breathless, making me forget for a moment my predicament. And then my working arm reached up and an armored gauntlet wrapped around my throat, rendering me truly breathless as is squeezed. These fucking calculators and their obsession with suffocating people to death. I didn't panic. Yet. Instead, my mind flashed through options I had while I was still lucid enough to think. First, I needed to buy myself time. I had a reserve soul fractal by my ribcage, and into that I dove, seeking the calm that came with it. Inside the soul fractal, my body seemed to be going catatonic, which greatly increased the time I had to work out a plan. My own mounting horror and panic faded away, as did my heart rate. Now I needed to figure a way out of here. No one was coming. Tuekar was already a monster to fight alone, and Atius would need every bit of effort he had in just surviving until the rest of the soldiers could tag in. I had to save myself. I could feel Journey's own soul begin to panic. The armor could tell how much time I had left before my body truly began to suffocate. A tendril of my own soul reached out to the armor, trying to reassure it. I've got a plan. Don't worry. One of my arms was broken, which the armor couldn't move, but armor was still movable by my own power, only heavy to do so. I struggled to lift the metal, my own muscles straining against the weight. The effort was forcing my body's heart rate, and decreasing the time I had to live. I had a single target, Atius's sword, sheathed on my belt. My hand missed the hilt a few times before I finally got it right and wrapped my fingers around it. The other hand continued to choke me, single-minded. Completely ruthless. I drew out the sword, turned it on, and slowly brought it up with an excruciating effort. My plan was simple: hack away at my rebellious hand holding my throat. If I did it right, I'd cut only the machinery that powered the gauntlet without cutting into my actual hand. If I couldn't manage that, I'd just cut the entire hand off and consider it a small price to pay for surviving. A spark of hope flared inside Journey as the armor watched. Tuekar seemed to be watching too, because the broken armored hand flickered back to life and began to buckle, the few ligaments that were still working contracted, seizing up and locking my hand in an awkward but unmovable position. That prick! It was hard enough to move the metal alone, now with parts of the armor functioning against me, there was no hope in moving the blade. I dove back into the soul fractal and reached out to Journey. The poor armor was beyond traumatized now. Not only was its single and only directive to protect the user, it was being used to directly kill me in the slowest possible way, all while it watched on helpless to do anything. This was the worst imaginable torture an armor could go through. I wrapped my soul around the spirit, reassuring it I'd find a way out. That everything would be okay. Can you detach the broken arm plates? I asked. Negative. Emergency systems in arm damaged. It answered back. Alternate solution required. Plan B it is. I reached for the fractal of mirrors, powering it on. I might not control my hand, but my hand still held an occult blade that was powered on. That's all the fractal of mirrors needed to work. An image of the frozen hand holding Atias's blade manifested and slowly lowered to cut into my traitorous hand. It worked for a second, Journey's shield staying dormant and allowing the mirror blade to cut into the metal. A lot easier to control, too, so I might just save my hand. And then the image vanished from sight. I thought I'd messed up my focus. I hadn't. Instead, the mirror fractal itself had vanished from my occult sight. Where did it go? I asked. Administrator commands received. Shutdown request was acknowledged and carried out. It had been turned off. Tuekar was watching somehow, getting feedback on what I was doing. Shit. Shit, shit, shit. Worse than scrap shit. I should have just sliced straight through my hand and not let him get a chance at realizing my plan. I needed another plan. He hadn't turned off any of the other fractals inside my armor, so the attack felt more like a passing backhand while he continued his fight with the clan lord. A distraction. Which meant if I knocked my traitorous hand out all at once, he'd be too late to stop me. Could I melt the hand off outright in one large blade of occult heat? No. Not possible. Maybe the dome fractal could shove his hand away from my throat, buy me a few more minutes. The dome fractal had been etched just about everywhere on my armor, including by my neckline. But it needed to have been right between the offending hand and my own fleshy neck to be useful in prying the hand off, so that was equally off the books. I ran through the rest of the fractals I had access to, coming up empty. Stuck frozen in a coffin, strangling myself to death, with all the occult around me, and none of it could help. For the first time, Journey's own soul reached out to me. A small, feeble tendril. I've known the armor for some time now, and it had never done this before. Blood oxygen levels are critical. Immediate solution required. User fatality imminent. I felt panic for the first time, even deep in my soul fractal. I could see my own body was starting to shake by itself, trying to suck down air and failing. Held completely still by the frozen armor. I had no working plan left, no cheat, no trick, nothing up my sleeve that I could pull off except to eject. What happens if my body dies, while I remain inside a soul fractal? Father had survived before as a spirit, but while I wasn't thrilled at the idea of dying and living like this, I'd take that over oblivion. Journey recognized the thoughts in my head, the understanding that I had hit the bottom of the well and death was all but certain for me. It went through a list of emotions, fear, despair, and finally, resolution. Alternate solution identified. Executing emergency shutdown. Book 3, Chapter 32, Like Father, Like Son. Before I could ask what it was even talking about, my body seemed to yank my soul back into place, everything turning back into life. The world and color surrounded me again, and the armor's deadly clutching hand fell down at my side, limp. My body didn't waste even a moment and was already drawing in fresh air, leaving me gasping and wheezing. The weight of the armor was now ever present, forcing me down into my knees as I hacked away for air at the same time, everything felt too heavy to move. On both my sides, I heard the sound of rolling cylinders and realized what Journey had done. It had ejected its fuel cells. All of them. All at once. Too quickly for Tuekar's middleware virus to inform him in time to counteract the order. Without power, the suit was now nothing more than a heavy lump of metal. Every occult fractal was equally powered off, leaving me stranded with no defenses. But I would live for another day, so that's a win in my book. I coughed and hacked some more, my throat feeling sore, all the while my arms strained to keep me upright. I tried to stand up, but the weight was insane. Nearly 400 pounds, all distributed around my frame. So long as I didn't move and kept kneeling upright, I could use the chassis itself to support the weight. But the moment I tried to stand or raise, I was fighting against it all. Just keeping myself from falling flat on my face was a challenge on my core. But I was alive. First things first, I needed to get dangerous things out of my way, lest I fall and impale myself on my own sword. With slow and steady movements, I managed to sheath Atias's sword back on my belt. At least my arms were light enough to somewhat move, so long as I took a good break in between breaths. With that out of the way, I now needed a new plan. No way around it. I'd need to take the suit off if I wanted to go anywhere now. It would be a long process, but better be out of the suit and mobile than to remain trapped here. There was that distinct sound of a colt behind me, and I felt my hairs stand on my neck. Well. Trying to escape your execution, are we? Tuekar said. You can't weasel your way out of everything, Winterscar. I tried to turn my head around to get a good view of him without falling flat on the ground, but that was harder than I thought. In the end, I didn't need to. The feather walked calmly around, until he was face to face, while I remained rooted on my knees. He looked just as beaten up as the last time I'd seen him. Face still clawed off by the Nightbreaker round he'd taken on our first encounter. Chest sliced through, exposing the internal circuits, many of which were glowing red hot, giving him a seriously ghoulish appearance. The halo was nowhere to be seen, since I'd sliced that in two. My mouth started running off before I could even think. How about we call it a draw today, and try another round tomorrow? We're all pretty tired and it's getting late. He grinned. Begging for your life? Futile, but entertaining. If you kill me, there goes your entertainment. I coughed, still finding it hard to talk. But I'm still open to putting all this behind us as a misunderstanding. He scoffed. Absolutely not. You are dying in the next minute, no exception. In that case, do I get a dying wish? He laughed and extended a hand. What could you possibly wish for? I wish you'd go fuck yourself. Respectfully. That one remaining eye seemed almost amused. Crass insults really are all you have left. Yell to the void all you wish. Tuekar said, the metal hand gently caressing my cheek. However, all insults need to be rectified eventually. Who's insulting you? Me? Gods no, I'd never dream of it. Swear on my life. I said. I'm just suggesting that you dying a miserable death would be great entertainment for everyone else. I wonder how I should kill you. The feather said. A more ironic death, or something painful. So many possible ways. Are you planning on talking me to death as your next new thing? I asked. You're off to a good start here. How about you just get it over with, or are you waiting for me to die of old age? He stood up, looking down at his hand as if contemplating what to do next. No, I'm passing time for the guest of honor to arrive. The metal hands tapped my forehead lightly. I think, given everything you've done, you deserve a more personal end. Something fitting for the moment. The hands clicked together, and he knelt down again. I think it was at that moment I realized I was actually about to die. Funny how that works. It just didn't seem real at all. Let's see. That human you cared about, your father was it? Do you remember how he died? The fingertips roved over my chest plate and down to my stomach. Right here. Yes, I think it would be most appropriate. The metal hand reached back, the fingertips glowing occult blue. I knew what was coming. There was no dodging it. I stared at him down, not wanting to look away. The hand cut straight through Journey's dead armor, into my gut and out my back. Only sound was my wet gasp, and a crack of bones. Oddly painless, considering there was a metal arm impaled through my stomach. Then I realized everything from my torso down had gone numb. His hand must have gone through my spine. My body started to slump forward and I couldn't hold my balance anymore. Only staying somewhat upright because his arm was in the way. I could see blood flowing away over the machine's hand, dropping down at the lowest point. I was dying. I mean, I knew I'd die eventually, but one moment I was doing solid and the next, everything had gone to shit and there was nothing I could do about it. He extracted the hand slowly, while I wobbled, feeling my strength fade out quickly. I slumped, falling down. A bloody metallic hand clamped down on my shoulder and held me still, keeping me upright for a little bit longer, leaving prints in my own viscera. Like father. Like son. He said, close to my ear. Goodbye, human. The hand withdrew, then slowly moved to my armor's collar and up to my neck. Darkness began to cling on the edges of my sight, slowly expanding. Blood had started to seriously pool by my paralyzed legs. The metal hand pulled up and I was dragged up with it. Off my knees and into the air. He brought me closer, watching me silently with that single eye. I tried to spit at him, but mostly just blood leaked out my mouth and dribbled down my chin. All I heard was the sound wet droplets hitting a puddle underneath me, and heavy footsteps as he took his time to walk me up to the cliff, where he held me over the abyss. Waiting. Smiling. I gurgled, trying to talk. Hush, Tuekar said. Have no fear, I'll send one of the lessers to collect your body once I'm done with your friends. I still have a use for your head. A moment passed, while the feather remained watching the rock pillars up ahead, waiting. I found out who the guest of honor he'd been talking about was. Lord Atius raced into view from the side of a pillar, snapping his head in every direction looking for where his opponent had run off to. Sagrius and 2 other Winterscar knights followed behind him, each racing as fast as their armors could sprint. The chosen knights must have been either defeated, or whittled down enough that Sagrius could come with 2 others like this. The moment they saw us, the group bolted into a dead sprint straight for the feather, weapons drawn. Tuekar laughed, raising me up. He didn't even have the decency to look at me as he let go. How cold is that? A casual shove and that was all. Atius tried to reach out his hand for me, nearly making it in one last leap forward. Getting stabbed by Tuekar in the process, but being defended by the Winterscar knights all striking out a moment later against Tuekar, piling against him. Whatever happened, he didn't make it in time. I fell. Blood trailed behind me, like a wet ribbon. Sounds of fighting fading away, replaced only by the howling wind in my ears. Seemed to go on for ages really, even though the full fall should be less than a minute. I saw someone else leap off the cliff, falling in a perfect swan dive straight after me. A knight? No. Not any knight. Sagrius. The captain of my guards. The crazy bastard had jumped off after me. In freefall, he twisted around, spinning climbing rope and throwing it expertly onto the cliffside, showing he at least had some kind of plan besides a suicidal leap of faith. He folded on himself next, accelerating downwards, faster and faster, one hand stretching out to grab me in freefall. Closer. Closer. That hand nearly reached my boot. And then he was yanked away all at once. The rope had come to an end, throwing him into an impromptu arc against the cliffside. He crashed hard into the rock wall, fracturing parts off, spinning wildly for a moment before he got his bearings again and held still against the sheer cliff. The last I saw of him was that faceless helmet, staring down at me. I had no relic helmet, no magnified view or vision. He faded away from my sight, just another small blur among the wall. The forest stretched before me, upside down from my vantage point as I fell, with the artificial sunset spreading wide across the 3 sources. Most surface scavengers died either in a bed surrounded by family, or alone, surrounded by broken metal and the white wastes. I should consider myself lucky that this was how I'd take my exit off the stage. The world down here really was beautiful. One last ragged breath. Life went on before me. The trees holding massive flocks of birds who flew around agitated. Many of them scrambled away into the trees, escaping the silhouette of a predator flying nearby, massive wings outstretched, somewhat visible even this far off. Ironic that my last sight in this world is the one thing I never thought possible up until I saw it with my own eyes a few hours ago. The birds swirled around the trees, spreading out through the forest and vanishing away. It's been a good run. I did pretty well for a regular human, all said and done, considering what I was up against. Obviously I regret everything, and if I could do it all over again, I'd have opted the path that didn't end up with a metal hand skewering me in the stomach, and getting thrown off a cliff like trash. I hope Journey's next user is more fitting for the old armor. I wish I could have left it one more message, to make sure it knew none of this was its fault. The panic and terror in that old spirit was something I felt more worried for than my own incoming death. Maybe I should have retired early. Settled down, leave all this scrap shit to Kedra. Instead I'd let it all go to my head, thinking I was the invincible hero in all this. See, the thing about knights and heroes, they all die eventually. Oh well. These last few months had been enough to fill me with accomplishments for a lifetime, so it all worked out in the end. Perhaps I didn't actually regret anything. Maybe if I did it all over again, I'd end up falling down this cliff anyhow. Except I wasn't falling anymore. Instead of the ground rushing up to splatter me, I was soaring above the trilene somehow and none the wiser on how that had happened. I could still feel my groggy body shutting down, the ribbon of blood now dripping under me as my feet dangled above the open air, which meant this wasn't my spirit flying up to the afterlife or a hallucination conjured up by my dying brain. No, something was holding me in the air, pale and delicate-looking hands wrapped around my chest plate, as far as I could see from what little sight I had left. Someone was holding me? Surreal. With whatever last bits of effort I had left, I tried to turn my head, to see what was going on. I got a glimpse at what looked like a shimmering wing, reflecting the artificial setting sunlight, from the edge of my sight. But that was all and my head dropped back down, letting gravity take hold. My eyes closed on their own, sleep growing fast through my mind, fogging up everything, and slowing down my train of thought to nothingness. Like a soft blanket whispering ever so gently, that it was time to let go. Book 3, Chapter 33, In Strange Company, Walking Upon Strange Lands. I didn't see anything that looked like wings from here, but wings could be more spectral occult stuff for all I knew. Armor-wise, there were two oddities I could spot. One was the metal half-skirt she wore, made up of metal blades all snugly hugging her hips with different lengths. The other oddity was the actual shape of the armor, looking far more sleek and compact than relic armor like Journey. Her gauntlets ended in claws even. A skirt of blades seemed on brand. All right, I said with a shrug, deciding not to question it further. Hecate the Deathless had wings, somewhere, and that was fine by me. Just happy to be here, I said, bringing my legs under me and standing up. The metal groaned for a bit, high-pitched whining escaped parts of the armor cracks reminding me that Journey was really straining itself just to move right now. That didn't sound healthy from the armor. How long has it been? 5 hours, 12 minutes, 22 seconds. She stopped, looked to the side as if someone had called her name, before turning back to me and quickly adding, my relic armor was tracking the exact time, of course. Returning to the point, we are approximately 23 miles away from your initial fall. The area was dangerous, and I needed to relocate before my presence could be noticed. Two things learned from this: the fight between Lord Atius and Tuekar would have long been over with. And second, she's very by the books, preferring exact measurements over approximations. I had an inkling of her personality, I've seen it before. If she'd been in the clan, she'd have been one of those retainers that were perpetually pissed off at how everyone flagrantly ignored proper protocols and rules, specifically idiots like me. Logi kindred spirits they were, just born into the wrong house. Except Hecate seemed more like the white-eyed rookie who hadn't yet lost all that initial innocence. Thinking everyone was only doing a one-time infraction and certainly wouldn't ignore rules a second time. Or third, fourth, 20th, and so forth until they lost all hope in humanity following proper operating procedures. I stood up and took a respectful bow. I realize I haven't properly introduced myself yet. I am Keith Winterscar, a surface knight from Clan Altosk, of House Winterscar. Thanks for the save, Lord Deathless Hecate, I owe you a life debt. Whatever kind of healing power she had, it was absolutely game-changing. No aches or anything. Felt like I'd had a great night's sleep. Journey was the one that sounded like it was in pain, given the noise it made on each movement. Hecate paused, giving my impromptu bow a measured look that gave no hints through the armor's faceplate. I suppose you do, she finally said, almost cryptically, taking a skewer out of the fire, and offering it my way. I didn't decline, of course, taking the food and a seat at the campfire, waiting for it to cool down. Hecate brought one clawed armored hand and dislodged her helmet, while the other hand brought her own skewer closer. It gave me a view of her full face for the first time up to now. Don't know why I expected her to look like anything else. She's an immortal demigod touched by divinity. The only other people I've seen come close to Hecate in terms of looks were in digital books. There was something ethereal and otherworldly in her looks, which made her almost inhumanly pretty. If she looked like an angel, it lasted up until she started eating. In about 3 bites and 1 second everything was gone from her hand. She'd stuffed her cheeks full until they puffed out like a rodent. That wasn't an exaggeration. By everything, I meant everything. The stick was no exception. I could hear the crunch of wood from here as she happily chewed away. Never mind. I was in very, very strange company. Hecate caught me staring eventually, and I took my cue to eat a bite of my food before anything could get awkward. I'm not sure if it's impolite to avoid eating the wooden part, but I didn't come from her culture and didn't have a jaw made of fucking steel. Food was edible. I'd rate it as an average meal out of 10. No spices, or anything fancy. Which made sense, she had been traveling light. Not even a backpack with her. I wouldn't expect her to be carrying spice pouches in her hands just to eat a little better. On her part, she seemed mortified for some reason, glancing down at her empty hand and back at me a few times, face flushing red. Scrap shit, I might have insulted her cooking by not eating the skewer itself. Undersider culture was a black hole and all I knew came from the pilgrims. Imperial customs might not be vogue down here, or niche even. Well, when among friends do as friends do. And all that other terrible life advice. I bit into the skewer and started to munch on the stick bite by bite. Awful. Terrible bitter taste that seemed to linger all over my mouth and suck out all the moisture. Plus I needed to really mash it up into a pump before I could swallow the thing, else I'd get splinters lining down my throat. At least the meat somewhat helped the whole process. Got water? I wheezed, coughing a bit from the ordeal. Hecate on her part kept bouncing her gaze between me and to my right side, looking a lot less mortified and now simply confused. Trying to tell me something? I raised my hands in mock surrender, deciding it wasn't worth trying to pretend anymore. If you're trying to tell me something, I really can't understand. Completely honest here. I'm from the surface, I'm not familiar with any of the undersider customs. Hand signs, or any kind of signaling included. The Deathless nodded, waving away the issue as if it wasn't what mattered. There's a stream nearby, but I do not have any canteens with me. She pointed in a direction, probably where the stream was. Do you just drink directly from the stream? Hecate paused, as if considering the question for the first time in her life. Yes. You couldn't say that with any kind of conviction? Gods above, Deathless down here were an enigma. Aetius brought with him all the standards as far as I'd heard. Maybe he was the one that had gone native after spending so much time among the clan, and out in the wild Deathless were far less reliant on any kind of tool? You know what? Not going to question it either. Emergency needs first. I had wood in my mouth and a desperate need to wash it down somehow. I stood up, hoping Journey was up to the walk and excusing myself for that drink. I'll come with you, she said, also standing up to follow behind. I've never met another Deathless besides my clan lord, I said, passing the time and trying to stick the wad of mashed up wood pulp on the side of my cheek. I always heard Deathless spend most of their time in the lower levels, and this is just the first strata. Are you one of the new Deathless I keep hearing about, or part of the old guard? She paused for a moment, as if considering what to say. I have been a Deathless for 1 month, 20 does she stopped, looking outright guilty, like she'd just been scolded. Approximately 2 months now. She corrected meekly. 2 months. Wait, Deathless don't have any previous memories, according to Aetius. Could she have been traveling around here aimlessly ever since her awakening? Has Hecate never been to an undersider city yet? That explains some of the oddities, she's God's damned feral. On the other hand, if she had just recently become a Deathless, that put her straight into the camp of the new generation, the strange generation. Again, not helping her case out here, but the new generation was supposed to have one thing the older ones didn't, if I put together all the bits and pieces I knew about them so far. Do you remember your past life? Yes, she said, putting that theory to rest and making me question a lot more. Up ahead, we got our first viewpoint to the stream I so desperately needed. Who were you? I asked as we reached the bank. She didn't answer that, and for a moment I thought I'd asked for some kind of taboo issue. I was a soldier, she eventually said and went quiet. Was a soldier? Something happened to change that up. The stream itself was a nice coursing thing, to which my gauntlet added a slight metallic tint to it as I brought up a handful to drink from and swished it around my mouth, swallowing the wood pump with a bit of effort. I took a few more drinks to get the gunk out of my teeth, cursing myself for accepting food in the first place. My other arm was still shredded and moving it around was a chore. Hecate didn't answer, either still contemplating what to say or wanting to move on to something else. I took it as an invitation to swap the topic. So what brought you here? You were traveling around, you said. My primary objective is to find a Might Speaker. I need to confer with one for additional guidance. Might Speaker? Never heard of those. Wait, no I have, someone I traveled with in the underground spoke about them in passing. Father had, though he'd been very sparse on the details. He hadn't believed the might speakers were honest about their claims, and warned me about charlatans. They are a religion created by people who claim to speak with mites. Hecate said. They're often considered damaged people undergoing psychosis by the cities and exiled outside once they cause too much trouble. I believe there might be more to their ramblings if I can find one and speak to them. However, recent events have forced me to expend a great deal of my power cells. She tapped the side of her leg with a finger, right where the cells would be. With my reserves low, I need to find a fountain to restore power first, before I can continue my search. I was not able to share enough with you to repair your armor either, only enough to restore basic movement. Can't hunt any machines around here and swipe their cells? You're a deathless, first strata machine should be like scooping snow to you. She shook her head, frowning. There are currently no machines nearby. I did notice this on the way. One blast door passed and suddenly nothing on the other side was trying to kill us. Except for Tuekar and company. I've never heard of machines just abandoning an entire sector. I said. Seems odd. They have not abandoned this sector. They've moved and gathered into one place. She said, cryptically. Before I could ask more questions, she turned the tables on me. And you, Winterscar? Why are you here? Need to get to the undersider city of Capranor. My sister's supposed to have returned from there a few weeks ago, but no sign of her yet. So I came looking. Heard anything about that city? She nodded. Yes. That is where the machines in this sector are gathered currently. That's not good. So that's why Kedra never came back. Clan Intel was right, machine movements down here were the culprit. She must have been caught in the middle of the war and, with all the machines sieging the city, could not escape. Or knowing her, deliberately stayed because that'd be the kind of thing she'd do. I need to get to her fast, help her get out of this mess. We don't need the Undersider Knights to help us anymore, not with all the advancements we've made using Talon's spellbook. Or if I recruited Hecate to come up to the surface for a few months and help clear out the incoming raiders. No reason to involve the Undersiders anymore. Though now I'd need to figure out a way to pry Kedra out of here. She was the type that would start calling me nasty names under her breath if I so much as insinuated we should leave people behind. She took those retainer vows seriously. How's the city holding up? Think we can still make it in time to help? I asked. Once we get the power cell problem handled and my own armor patched up, we could join the fight there. There is no fight. Hecate said sternly. What? There is no fight. She diligently repeated. The city surrendered a week ago. It has been under machine rule since. What? Book 3, Chapter 34, It's the Neighbors Again. Urfus Knight named Kedra. Kedra Winterscar. Did you run into her at the battle? Did she make it down here in the first place? A set of emotions passed through her features, but they were gone before I could pull answers from those. Yes. She finally said. There was a surface knight named Kedra. She currently leads the rebellion that remained in the city. They were still active, last I heard. Relief sprung through me, unwinding tension I hadn't noticed before. Of course, she'd be the one leading a rebellion. Thank the gods. She's both alive, and I know where she is. The hardest parts of this mission are done. If a full invasion wasn't able to kill Kedra, she certainly isn't going to keel over anytime soon now that things are more quiet. I took a deep breath, and the world seemed just a tad bit brighter than before. I just need to get to the city now, find a way to get in contact with her, and drag her out of here. You'll attempt to withdraw back to the surface? Hecate asked, sounding interested. No point staying down here. My clan needs everyone recalled. I said, before realizing I was being rather rude. Hecate's city had been invaded and here I was saying we didn't need them for anything, so we'll be jumping out the airship. My fat mouth again. If the Deathless was disturbed by this, she made no show of it. The opposite even. Yes, I believe it would be best for Kedra to be returned to the surface and leave the current city. It's no longer as safe as it was. She said, completely deadpan serious in her delivery. I gave her a grin. So you do have a sense of humor in there. I was getting worried. She seemed confused. Which made me think her deadpan delivery was actually deadpan for a reason. She was serious that the city crawling with killer machines was no longer as safe as it used to be, given the killer machines crawling all over the place now. I shook it off for now. For my clan, our neighbors are also making a racket. A racket? Why does that tool present any kind of danger? Not a racket. They're not here to play wall ball with us and sulk around like sore losers. It's more a figure of speech. Something about wanting our complete annihilation and submission, you know, the usual. So that's why I've got to grab Kedra and drag her back to the surface. She still seemed confused for a moment, and I decided to swap the topic rather than continue confusing her. I'm more surprised you're okay with losing the head of your rebellion for your city. No undersider pride or anything. I was not originally from that city. And while I was present in the combat, I do not hold much patriotism. I am simply being realistic, she said, sounding very careful about her wording. I jabbed a thumb at the ceiling. I can always appreciate a bit of boots on snow logic. Talking about that, I don't want to drag you into my own affairs, so since we both need to refill our power supplies, I say let's travel together for that part, and split ways after. You can go find your might speakers and I'll continue on to the city. I still owe you a life debt for saving my life. I'll leave you coordinates for where my clan is. Anytime you want to call up that favor, come see us. I'm kind of a big deal up there now. The Deathless nodded. We can travel together for the moment and decide future plans at the Might Terminal. She pointed, in that direction is the nearest working power station that's been mapped. If we begin tomorrow morning, we should reach it by sunset. We will have to walk to conserve energy. Should we play lots for who gets first shift? I'm not sure if we'll need to turn off our armors overnight to conserve battery or if their sleep mode would be good enough. Don't have my helmet to talk to this Buckthead, I said, knocking on my chest plate. Rather, I had no means at all to talk to Journey. All the fractals within the armor were unpowered. I think it was in some kind of power-saving mode where only basic features were active. And those basic features didn't consider the newly added fractal system I had going on. Hecate nodded. You can power down your armor completely. I have enough energy to remain operational and alert. She stopped for a moment, and then clarified. I mean, my armor has that feature. Of course, I will do the sleep like you while we remain here until night has passed. We'll do the sleep? I asked, eyebrows raised. Undersider jargon was so strange. But I suppose we had a lot of idioms on the surface that wouldn't make much sense to Hecate either. I should consider toning those down since it might confuse her, same way as it was confusing me slightly. I got the gist of it, but I'm going to guess that if I started talking about tumbling around in the snow or telling someone to lick ice, she probably won't understand what that really means beyond the literal. On her part, her cheeks flushed slightly before she stuttered. I mean, I'll be sleeping too, like a normal person would, yes. She stopped again, was about to say more before, but changed the topic. Anyway, we'll rely on my armor to wake us if there is danger, and otherwise sleep. That's the important part, yes. This is going to be a learning curve. Things I've learned about Hecate in the past day hiking. She never gets hungry, but when she does, the most dangerous place to be is between her and her food. She eats fast enough that a finger could be chomped on and eaten before she'd notice the screaming. Second, I'm starting to suspect she's an actual witch of some kind. Often, she's looking across the distance, somewhere far off as if she were listening to the wind or communing with nature. If it happened while we were making headway I wouldn't find it too odd. Except she keeps doing that mid-conversation, usually staring off to my right or left as if checking if something's following behind us. If she stopped to taste the stone in order to tell me the history of what animals had passed by with exact timestamps, I'd take it as fact and not bat a single eye. My bets were that she had some kind of passive deathless sight that let her see far more than humans would. The armor she wore only added to my theory that she's a witch. Sleek, ending with small spikes, it looks very different from the more utilitarian plates I'm used to. The part that really grabbed attention was the folded-up metal blades at her waist. Now that she was walking along in bright lights instead of sitting down by a dim campfire, I saw more of the detail there. Like Tuekar's hand, I realized the blades weren't held or attached to anything. Rather, they were floating. Occasionally they'd shift around, especially when she sat or had to redress them. Her armor handled it all, moving them for her without prompt. I think it was a different variant than the Undersiders had access to, possibly something more powerful from the lower stratas. She was a deathless after all, so only makes sense they'd get the best. I'd bet they could stretch out wide since they weren't moored to anything. I haven't seen them unfurled out like wings yet, so it was still a dice roll if they were the actual wings she said she had or if they were just another part of her armor's strange looks. Third thing about Hecate is that when she was confident in something, she was utterly unwavering and had no shred of self-doubt. Traversing the area was like following a tour guide, since she seemed to know exactly where she was at all times. In contrast, she'd often stumble on her words and get flustered easily. When I mean flustered, I mean the whole package, hands wringing, looking anywhere else, trying to change topics in the most awkward way possible and only getting more flustered. Couldn't win a poker game even if she could wear a helmet. Problem is that every time she said something that made her go red like this, it made no sense to me why she'd be embarrassed about it. She'd had every tell in the book, except all the wires were crossed. Drawing a winning hand in that proverbial poker game might not make her react at all for all I knew, but someone else standing up for a glass of water could. And she's fast. Much faster than Lord Atius. We had no ranged weapons with us, so hunting down meat for food required chasing down and putting in the work. She'd spot animals from a distance, casually walk up until they got spooked, and then simply dash forward with a single stab, perfectly dead center on their head every time. Moved like a predator in that sleeker armor and didn't hide her skill either. Her speed was on par with a Winter Blossom user, so if all the new Deathless are at that level, I can see why everyone's been making such a big deal out of them. Tuekar let slip that they were peasants, just common folks who got deathless powers and remembered who they were before, with the only other advantage from the previous generation being their sheer numbers. Then again, he was a feather whose definition of challenge was fighting teams of veteran immortal demigods as a starting snack. A lot of knights would rank as slightly stronger than peasants to him, so it's possible he'd throw them all in the same bucket in terms of power levels. Father had told me a few other snippets, almost 2 months ago when we were caught underground. Told me they were unhinged, and had no true loyalty to anyone. They're known to fight each other mostly, and to be motivated by greed, weapons, armor, trophies, or just general glory. Make their own little in-groups and guilds, like what warlocks did. What he'd heard could be survivor bias, where the only rumors making it to the surface were the most dramatic ones. He might have never heard about the other deathless that rejected the call of arms and tried to return to their old life, only the ones that embraced the new powers and shook it for everything it's worth. That left Hecate in a strange place. I could make an argument for Unhinged, but not in a dangerous way. And if her speed and skills were commonplace, those would absolutely have already reached the surface as rumors that they fought better than anyone else, but there hadn't been a mention of their skills being any more or less dangerous than the current Deathless. Cathita had told me the only people she knew that could consistently match that sort of speed were the Imperial Imperators, which were the most dedicated elites of the Imperial Army. Likely working in her order. Hecate did say she was once a soldier, although something must have happened to make her desert the army. And she doesn't seem to be in any rush to kill machines either or get into any fights, despite the nearby events. In fact, she might have been in hiding this whole time, only forced to help the Undersider city grudgingly, hence why she didn't care I was here to pry Kedra out. That's another point for the retired veteran trying to find peace in their life, away from fighting. My running theory was that she's a wayward Imperial Imperator, who's developed moral objections to the machine war, likely involving the Chosen in some way. Atius had treated them like people who were caught in a crossfire. It could be Hecate ran into the same wall and this was how she chose to handle it, by leaving it all behind. That made discussion about the Undersider city very awkward between us as it turned out. The citizens there are safe and the machines are not interfering with their lives. She said as I prodded into that subject. I do not see a reason to intercede or fight. Hecate was stubborn about this point. Rather, it just seemed to annoy her further. The Pillar Heart has been destroyed. Even if the city were to eliminate all machines in the area, they have no means to hold the city anymore. Ahead, the path was blocked by a set of cubical rocks all stacked chaotically on one another. Each cube was a little taller than I was. Hecate didn't slow down, walking straight at the obstruction. I know that, but we could at least help them evacuate, maybe. I said, following behind. Or at least some of them. She paused at the foot of the cubes, and began to jump up, tiny hops that hardly used even her calves and yet launched her straight over and onto each cube. Made it look effortless. What did I say, witch? She's a witch. From what danger would they need evacuation? The machines have kept to their terms. The witch said. Your goal was to find your sister and extract her from the city. Why does the city's fate matter to you? Can you not leave them alone? She had me there. You're right that I don't technically owe these people anything. I said, taking a more grounded leap forward and using my hand to help pull myself up the rest of the way. I didn't want to strain Journey's leg sections too much. Both arms being broken was something I can work around. But if one of my legs gave out, I'd be deep in the scrap shit. I won't stay in the city for long, but who knows what I could do while I'm there. Besides, machines have been trying to exterminate us, and have been for as long as we've known each other. And humans are better, she said, looking down on me with a slight frown. As you've mentioned, on the surface, the only enemies you fight are your neighbors, other humans, who are willing to do far worse than what the machines occupying Capranor are currently administering. Are you claiming that to be a better fate? This is objectively false. Look, if you line up a group of 10 humans together, one of them's going to have a problem because someone stole their wallet or seduced their wife, but at least it's not something on an extinction level threat. Line up 10 machines, and you've got 10 killer toasters looking to strangle your neck, guaranteed every time. Statistically, most humans do not steal wallets or seduce someone's wife in their lifetime. She asked, and I could hear the trailing question mark to that. I admit I do not have enough evidence to confirm my claim. My archives do not have any records of socio-economic data points on this specific crime statistic. Hecate, I said, slowly, clapping both my hands together, taking a deep breath and putting my resolve together. I know you saved my life, and I want you to know that I'm very grateful for that. However, if we spend more than a day together, I swear to all the gods I'm going to find some way to teach you a sense of humor, even if it kills me. I have a sense of humor, she said, puffing out her cheeks and narrowing her eyes. All my friends have confirmed I have a very good sense of humor. Is that before, or after, you threatened them with your swords? I would never threaten my friends, she said, clearly insulted. Then her eyes widened, as if she'd just come up with an excellent idea. If they cede to my demands before I threaten them with my swords, it does not count as threatening. She turned, grinning. I gave her a thumbs up. Solid start. 10 points. I don't know how I ended up on this war path, however it has to be done. It can't not be done. Someone as wide-eyed and by the book as Hecate can't be left to her own devices. Talking about evidence to back up her claims? What sort of nonsense was a dirty word like that doing anywhere near me? Forgive me, all gods above and below, but you lot must have known this was a bad idea from the start when you sent her my way, so everything that happens next is squarely on you. I absolve my hands of all responsibility. Almost as if the gods were smiting me for my heresy right this moment, we ran into problems within moments of my personal resolution. We're approaching the terminal, she said, up ahead. However, something's not quite right. Please approach with caution. And then she drew swords. Both of them. When a deathless is drawing their weapons, that's when you've got a problem on your hands. Someone in need of threatening? I asked, hoping the answer was something more light-hearted. Then again, this is my luck we're talking about, and I'm pretty sure I've used up all the good part of it. Having a deathless with healing abilities just happened to pass by the same area I was about to get killed at. No. Maybe. The terminal isn't responding. I must take precautions. I sighed, drawing out Atias's blade and taking my own post. Fine, let's go threatening together. The old weapon felt on its last legs occult-wise, though the edge lit up bright blue as any occult blade would. Technically speaking, the blade was in perfectly good shape. If it was good enough for the clan lord to use in combat, it'll have to do for me. So long as I don't use the blade's secondary abilities. Pretty soon the trees became sporadic as the two of us silently creeped up to where the fountain was supposed to be. The mites hadn't hidden it, at least. It was front and center on the top of a white granite cube, wide enough for me to pace around a few times without issue. The reason why Hecate had thought something wasn't adding up right was equally obvious. A good portion of the cube had a perfectly round void cut into it, going straight through the fountain, into the pedestal, and out the other side onto the ground where it dug a few more inches before fading out. As a result, the entire structure did not look like it would work. At all. It seems our actions have been anticipated. Hecate said calmly. I'd seen this sort of damage before. That's a drake, I said, pointing the tip of my sword at the damage. I don't understand how that could be, that model shouldn't be here. Hecate said. The battle for the Undersider city eliminated all of their kind in the sector. Speaking of the wayward new fan we'd attracted, her hand dropped a sword before I could answer with anything, reached out to my chest and yanked me out of the way right as a beam cut through trees and leaves, zipping straight through the air where my chest had been a moment ago. That's twice I'd escaped death by a narrow few inches in one day. I gave a look backwards, spotting the violet glow of the enemy far above a cliffside. Exactly the suspect I thought I'd see. The reptile skull seemed to almost leer at me before shambling away, out of sight. It will try to assassinate us again. Hecate said, looking very concerned. We need to seek shelter where it cannot see you. I don't understand how one could be here. I've amassed a good amount of enemies on the way down here, might have pissed off a certain someone who's ordered up the banners to come after me. The Deathless looked over to the cliffside again, but the Drake was long gone, looking for another good sniping spot. I believe you are correct. It must have been recruited from a different section. She turned and pointed in a direction, starting off in a jog. I followed behind, hoping Journey's energy reserve would survive the additional strain to wherever we were going. Forest quickly shadowed us. Shouldn't we keep an eye on where it slunk off to, instead of showing our backs to it? I asked. Their kind do not attack from the same location unless forced to, or ordered to. They are ambush predators that rely on killing targets before the target is aware of their location. It will only close the distance if hunting wounded prey. Having failed to deal any damage, it will be currently relocating. I am, however, not certain about its full objectives. That was probably looking for my body, if my guess is right. And when it didn't find me, it knew I'd be looking for a power terminal next. I said, keeping an eye on the ridge lest it try to take another cheeky shot at me. I don't think I told you the gritty details of why I fell off a cliff in the first place, did I? You have not. She said. Take a guess. Combat. Well yes, but that's a cheap answer. 0 points. She stayed silent for a moment, keeping her pace steady with me in tow. Then her head bobbed up as if she'd come up with an acceptable answer. Subpar combat. She amended. 2 points. You can do better than that. She frowned, thinking further on it. I am hoping you didn't fall off that cliff on a dare. First off, a lot better, 10 points. Second, you're right that it wasn't on a dare. There was a dispute that I admit could have been resolved more amicably, with me stabbing someone else faster than he could. And lastly, are you insinuating I'd jump off a mile-long cliff if my friends dared me to do it? What sort of idiot do you think I am? The kind that fell off a cliff. She said, proudly, as if answering a trivia question. Praise yours, there might be hope for you after all. I said, where are we going by the way? There is another registered power fountain further away that is buried in a smaller sub-cave system of this area. I have calculated that it fits all criteria for safety we need as of now, more specifically is unreachable to larger machines. Once I have restored my armor's power, I'll be able to fly to and dispatch the pursuer without issue. Great, the best place to hide underground is to hide even further underground. Mites had their own twisted sense of humor it seemed. Book 3, Chapter 35, Regrets. If machines have emotions, I'd bet my stolen airspeeder that Drake is beyond pissed. As Hecate had predicted, it had not stopped at one failed assassination attempt. Instead, the Drake had continued with dogmatic persistence, each attempt being a little more creative than the last. And each time, Hecate, the feral witch of the Mite Forest, spotted the little creep the moment it poked that skeletal snout out. Recently, it had stopped trying to snipe me and was trying to off her first instead. She didn't seem too concerned with getting hit, likely because losing an arm was a lot less permanent when she could heal herself, or just come back from the dead. That said, I'd rather not have to go through that at all. Dying was a pain to deal with. The Drake wasn't all-powerful. It couldn't see through trees easily, so anytime we were in the deeper foliage, we were safe enough. We plotted most of our path to be spent in the forest, though we wouldn't get to stay forever in the foliage. We also had colors to help us out. Everything around us had a color palette of red leaves, dark brown tree trunks, and stark white granite rocks or cubes with the occasional splash of blue for a river. Violet sticks out like a sore thumb and our unwelcome guest was a die-hard fan of that color. It was even easier in the darker underbrush, since the Drake glowed. So even if it hung around the thicker branches like a cat, we'd spot it the moment it could spot us. Seems like a glaring oversight for a sniping unit, but machines weren't exactly a clever bunch as I'd come to realize. They took over the world by sheer persistence, as far as I could tell. Or the feathers had been the real lifters getting things done in the background. Poor bastards. My heart weeps for overworked workers everywhere. That said, the Drake had several advantages over us. It was fully mobile while we were forced to walk in order to conserve power. And Drakes can outrun relic armor over enough time, as I'd learned with father the first time I ran into the critters. So our friend kept appearing at all kinds of angles around, looking to surprise us. But the greatest advantage this asshole had over us was range, hands down. Neither Hecate nor I had any rifles to work with, only occult blades. That left the Drake perfectly safe from any retaliation. It couldn't kill us, and we couldn't kill it. After a few hours of a tied game where nobody was winning, the Drake started doing odd things to shake the status quo. I've been in a lot of strange situations, I remarked, glancing up the wall side. This boot stomps everything else deep into the snow. Hands down. Going to make a great story for the dinner parties, my long romantic walk with a terrifying machine of mass destruction. I said. SSSS. Stay still, little human. The Drake purred, one eye looking down at us. For only a flicker of time, an eye blink. I'll free you for all of eternity. That hair-raising shuddering voice. It felt like a claw brushing down my spine, touching every vertebrae, looking for a weak point to stab into. The trail here had a steep wall of white granite rocks on one side, at least 10 or 20 feet high. Trees were all nice and good, however we were walking on a time limit. At some point, Journey would run out of energy, and that deadline was fast approaching. So, we had to pick the quickest route from here to there, and that wasn't always under the leafy red canopy. Like everything made by mites, the cliffside wall by my side was rough and asymmetrical. Many blocks failing to line up with one another, but still aesthetic anyhow no matter where I looked. I'll give that one to the mites. They knew how to make things look good. What was ruining the artistic experience was the thing prodding along on the top of the wall, taking lazy steps to match our pace, skeletal claws keeping the massive body up and off the ground. It lumbered forward, as if it had eaten a full meal and could barely walk, some kind of thin tongue flicking out now and then to taste the air. Tail swaying left and right like a happy dog with each step. SSSS, why not surrender? Why hold so strongly to that decaying shell you call a home? Reach for me, and I shall offer you salvation. If you're trying to hold my hand, buy me dinner first at least. I said. Rude. If father could see me now, I don't know what kind of face he'd make. Probably stern disapproval, but understanding it was inevitable given my luck that I'd end up walking around with a toaster. Kedra would just stab it and politely ignore any discussion about this forever after. But to be fair, this was better company than some of the past dates I've been to. At least Hecate was walking solemnly right by me, also dragged into all this. SSSS. Are you not tired? It hissed back. Aimless, adrift, for so long now. Downtrodden vagrants, struggling for each step. SSSSS. Can you not hear the blood crying inside? Writhing. Squirming to break. I bring the end, it asks. A mercy. Least I get sweet nothings like this whispered to me. Wasn't that romantic? It's like the devil on my shoulder asking me to pull levers. Guess what, my friend? I learned my lesson. A nice throwable rock came across my way and I made good use of it. The pebble bounced off its grinning skull with little effect. Neither of us are dumb enough to throw away our weapons at you, so scram already. I glared at it before glancing at Hecate. What's it even want by hanging out so close? Is it trying to talk us to death now? Run out of creative ideas. It is studying our dynamic in order to make better plans for the future. Hecate said, walking ahead of me. It has failed to kill us, thus it needs a new angle for the next attempt. Do not pay it attention. It is misguided. I could tell she was monitoring the thing, but otherwise, not letting it stop us from our goal. At this range, if it tried to laser us, we'd see it charge up the beam long before it had time to hit us with it. Misguided? That thing wants us dead. It's not even being coy about it. I pointed a finger at the suspect accusingly. The lizard licked the air in front of it, keeping a baleful eye down at us. If it had been a little closer we might have a good chance of throwing in a cold blade fast enough. Of course, the walking calculator knew that. Look at it, pretending to be slower than it really was. I've seen one jump from building to building before better than Teed could bounce a fat airspeeder. You're not fooling me, you little scrapshit. I hissed, bending down to grab another rock. The Drake made no move to dodge, letting the rock bounce off its head. It glanced down, almost with bemused contempt. I threw another one at the thing just for good measure. Throwing rocks is ineffective. This model's armor is too thick for such a projectile to do damage. Hecate said. It's not about the damage, it's about the message. Besides, look at that cute little face. Don't you just want to throw rocks at it until something breaks? The drake snickered. You poor misshapen children. SSS. Let me help. Let me set you both free of this shell. Be reborn in her glory, deep inside. Hecate turned her full attention to the lizard for the first time in the past hour. It might listen to reason. What, are you thinking of taming it? I asked, thinking it was a bit from her. And then realizing she was actually serious about that. Well, if anyone could tame a machine, it would be Hecate. She was a witch, after all. How's that sound like Fido? I said, looking up at the drake and patting the wall affectionately. Want to carry us for a bit? My legs are sure getting tired here. Might just keel over any moment now. SSSS. I can carry you to hollow ground. A place, where all is quiet and still. The drake said. Where hope cannot deceive you anymore. That's a euphemism for please go pound rocks and die in a ditch, isn't it? Doesn't sound like we're off on the right foot here Fido. Machines cannot be tamed. Hecate said, dashing my hopes of having a badass lizard mount. We need to reach an accord. A better man than me taught me an excellent lesson about this. These things can't be reasoned with. You'll only give them an easier time killing you. I said. I saw her flinch for a moment, before looking my way. Your father? She asked, almost timidly. That caught me by surprise. How'd you guess? I paused, realizing the trap here. Actually, don't tell me. I'll just pretend that was a great guess on your part and had nothing to do with my deep-rooted insecurities and personal baggage being that obvious to spot. Is it possible that he might not have been correct about that point? She looked almost guilty, as if she was stepping on thin ice. The drake kept an eye pinned on her, clearly looking for another moment of dropped guard. I knocked on the wall, glaring up at it. Daring it to try something. In my experience, he ended up being right about a lot of things. I said while I kept direct eye contact with the little beastie. It snorted, before moving one lazy paw to drag its weight across the next patch of granite cubes. Would you believe in exceptions to this? Hecate asked. Maybe a few months ago before I met said killing machines like Fido here. I said. Things changed. What Chan the Deathless stopped mid-sentence before she started again. If an enemy chooses to change, would you give them a chance for redemption? Fido kept prodding along, listening in but making no other move. Part of me was still treating this all like idle chatter, but it seemed like Hecate was serious about this question. There was that wobble in her voice and mannerism that got my heckles up. This had stopped being a light-hearted chat. Could this have something to do with her desertion from the army? But why is she so hung up with the machines about that? Machines are machines, they don't change. Humans do. If an enemy chooses to change, hey? If a group of slavers buried their swords and swapped sides, I think I would give them a chance. But it wouldn't be something based on what they said or however good their apology speech is. I'd need to see action. If you want to know who someone really is, watch them make a hard decision. She nodded and seemed to brighten up. Then her smile faded. And, what if those slavers had done harm to you, personally? What if they'd killed people close to your heart? Is there any action that would change things? I thought about that. Put myself in that situation. Imagined what would have happened if the slavers had truly killed Ellie, for example. What if that killer had surrendered and tried to make amends? Could I forgive him for killing my best friend? I saw her sprawled on the ground in that access tunnel, dead from blood loss. I had a rifle in my hands raised up, aiming down sights. I imagined the slaver who killed her walking towards me, hands up, weapon cast down. Taking his helmet off, powering his shield down. He regretted it. He was deeply sorry. Saying he'd do better. That wasn't enough. My rifle stayed pointed right at his head, my finger on the trigger. I imagined harder. I imagined him crying, imagined genuine sorrow and horror inside at what he'd done. Imagined his internal realization that he'd cut not just a life, but an entire story short. All the people whose lives she could have changed. The warmth that would never return to the world. I saw his resolution to be better. Saw it deep in his eyes, the weighty decision to clean up his act, and become a better person starting now, even if it meant dying right here to make amends. The rifle wobbled in my hands. Rational thoughts lit my path. Someone who truly wanted to change. Could I hate someone who had faced their own inner hatreds, and decided to rise above their history and nature? I knew the right answer. Knew what needed to be done. Memory of my time with Ellie, and knowing it was all gone. And the person who'd taken it all away was standing right before me, at my mercy. I felt my mind weight justice with righteousness. My rifle slowly dropped. And then Ellie's lifeless eyes opened, turned, and stared at me. You'd let my murderer go? Her dead mouth whispered. The rifle snapped back up. My fingers pressed the trigger. I shook my head, trying to clear my mind of the morbid imagination. It was hard to get my breathing back under control. For a simple thought exercise, that had done a surprising number on me. The last image in my mind was that of the imaginary slaver, a soft sad smile and closing eyes right before the bullet punctured through his forehead. As if resigned to his fate. Where exactly are you going with this? I pointed at the monster watching us, changing the subject. Do you think you can negotiate some kind of ceasefire with FIDO here? My answer wasn't something she wanted to hear. It was better to keep my fat mouth shut. It doesn't know better right now. She said. It hasn't been taught better or shown a different path. SSS. The path is eternal. Metal is eternal. SSSS, why resist, little humans? Become eternal as well. I threw another rock at it. The attack sailed directly at the thing, and once more it let the attack bounce off, leaving the Drake unworried. The violet eye continued to track my motions without pause. By all means, go on and negotiate with FIDO here. Maybe it just wants to gnaw on a bone or two and we've got it all wrong this entire time. It could be just trying to sell us something this entire time. You are open to the possibility of a peaceful resolution. Sure. Why not? I said. FIDO was a stranger, couldn't care less if he fucked off and walked away. I'd let him go. My goal was to grab my sister and get her back to the surface. If the machines wanted to get out of the way, I wouldn't go hunting for trouble. It wasn't personal between us. Hecate didn't answer me. Instead, she took a breath and gave the thing attention. You must have already calculated that failure is nearly inevitable with the options on hand. You do not need to do this. I hear the rot whispering lies, such sweet lies, deep inside the hollow of your bones. It answered. SSSSS. Do you believe them? Hope is delusion, a final dying breath of the lost and desperate. There is no peace. There never can be. Respectfully, I have items I must attend to before I am ready to abandon my shell. Please select a different target to hunt. She paused for a moment, flinching again. No, it hissed back, almost leering at us. I refuse. Hecate seemed outright crestfallen, expression turning. I suppose as a human, it will not listen to me. We are enemies, after all. My old man's theories were simple, but straightforward. I said, wiping my hands of non-existent dirt before reaching down to grab another nice, round rock. This was a fun hobby all things considered. The giant murder machine built to murder, wants to murder. Easy. Don't sweat the details. Wanna throw rocks at it with me instead? It makes funny sounds if you hit the snout just right. SSSS, why not, simply lay down. The Drake asked, all innocent now. You've walked so long. Laden with breaking bones and heavier thoughts. Decaying marrow, slowly shriveling up. Thinning strings of separating muscle. Your flesh betrays you with each step, little humans. Your mind deludes you with each breath. Hope is your enemy. Hope is your jailer. I can set you free. You're such a charmer, FIDO. How about you come closer here for a kiss? Say, within stabbing distance. I said, and threw another rock at it. This time, the machine's mouth snapped out with alacrity, snatching the thrown missile in its jaws and breaking it into a small cloud of pulverized chunks. It leered down at me again, as if daring me. I think I was finally annoying it with all my rock throws. Good honest work always gets rewarded in the end. They could be more. Hecate said, while the lizard and I glared at each other. I was getting a distinct feeling she was on a strange side here. Fit into the theory of a veteran wanting peace, but peace with machines? Oh. Day. I'd spent too much time thinking humans vs machines. There were people who were both now. Did you have some kind of experience with a group of people who call themselves the Chosen? I asked. She nearly halted her steps, but resumed the march a moment after. I do. She said slowly, confirming some of my theories and opening a whole other ration bar. That's why she's talking about people changing sides, or enemies who repent. Some of the Chosen are very close friends of mine. Some of my only friends. People I have learned to cherish. I can understand the Chosen. I said, carefully. Met a priest once, and all said and told, he's just trying in his own way. I get that. But machines? Come on Hecate, you're deathless now and have been for 2 months. Machines should be your primary enemy. Why am I arguing for this point in the first place? You were a soldier, right? No, she said, with an odd amount of venom that stopped me right before I could pester her further. Something about being reminded of her days as a soldier was a soft spot. If she had been part of the Imperial elite, it's possible they had given her orders to fight the Chosen? It could have gotten bloody. Maybe killing other humans ended up being more than she'd signed up for. Especially people she considered friends at one point. Stuck between duty and a growing morality to deal with that clashed with her past actions, or might have even grown from them in the first place. Tough place to be. But before I could speculate more, she turned to look my way, and I saw her sharp eyes. They held a kind of deep melancholy that I couldn't describe. It ripped into me like a dagger, cutting through all my arguments and leaving me feeling beyond stupid. I didn't want to argue with her anymore. Poking and prodding at something that clearly hurt her to talk about. She wasn't someone I wanted to hurt, and there were a lot of ways to hurt someone without drawing a single weapon. A Winterscar should know better. It's complicated, Keith. And I am done being controlled by expectations. She said softly, looking away. I brought my hands up, palms out to my chest. I shouldn't have pushed. This was a mistake, and I'm sorry to have brought it up. In the end, not my hangar, not my cargo. I should stick to my lane. SSSS, all this pain. All this turmoil. All this grief. Why not simply give in? The Drake asked, eyes looking at Hecate. I threw another rock at the machine. Shut up, we're not talking to you right now. Read the room. It hissed angrily as the rock bounced off the hard shell, but otherwise continued to prod along a safe distance away on top of the cliffside. I spent the time looking for another rock on the path. Hecate gave it a sideways glance. You serve the feather, to Ekar, do you not? A hiss. Ah, you know of my master. She knew to Ekar? The plot thickens. Before tossing me into the abyss, he did promise he'd send a lesser to recover my dead body. I wonder how that bastard fit into her past. He had ties to the Chosen. Maybe he'd ordered them to fight against Hecate's division, and that's where things went wrong. You don't need to obey his orders. She said. You can leave. You have the freedom to leave. Please, you are still so young, there is so much more you could do with the existence you have. Be better. It snickered. Little human, do you pity me? SSSS. I follow his orders, gladly. He serves the lady, and I serve her will through him. The cycle continues. I am but a caretaker, I restore order. It is my nature. It will always end like this. You will always fail, in the end, no matter how you struggle. It felt like watching a puppy get kicked. First me stomping all over her dreams, and now the Drake was doing the same, confirming there couldn't be peace. I wonder if this was how Father had felt when he'd had to drag me out of my own naive daydreams of peace between man and machine. I needed to be kinder. It's got orders, and it probably can't return empty-handed even if it wanted to. If the situation were different, maybe a peaceful solution could have been reached. I said. And hey, I guess if nobody ever tries to make peace happen, then it'll never happen. A small chance is better than no chance at all. Maybe it's worth trying after all. She smiled, but it was a forced kind of smile. Hiding away pain, trying to hold on to the idea that things will be better. Maybe. She said, nodding slowly. I hope so. I'll keep trying. Book 3, Chapter 36, Setting a Trap. It harassed us for 2 entire hours before we finally walked past the ridge. Fido never relented on his mission to murder us and didn't make a great conversational partner either. Terrible date, wouldn't recommend him to anyone, except Ellie. Because what are old friends for, if not to piss each other off? It was worth it in the end. We'd made it to the Might Fountain with about 2 hours of extra energy to spare. Had we taken any other detour, I'd probably be dragging bits and parts of Journey on the ground behind me and hoping Hecate's deathless abilities included speed outside of her armor. She was superhuman after all. Everyone in the clan grew up hearing all about the heroics deathless have done and abilities they've used, but Lord Atius was the only deathless I'd ever actually met. Most people wouldn't even get to see a deathless in their lifetime. While talking, I hit on the subject of abilities she might be able to use if we ran out of power, in order to plan out the worst-case situation. Apparently hit another nerve with that as she once more started to short-circuit. Stuttering out an answer, stopping, and gazing off into the distance again. This was a quirk of hers I was getting the hang of. Hecate had strange habits and mannerisms. And I'm not talking about her being a feral witch out here in the middle of nowhere. More like something I've seen in people among the clan, especially Reachers. My going theory was that she'd occasionally stutter for no particular reason, either her mind went blank or she had a bunch of other thoughts at the moment, and being more attuned to her slip-ups, she'd panic that more stuttering would come out. Which would make everything worse and spin her down a spiral. So naturally, the best way to deal with that was to stop talking and look away. She'd talk again once she was back in control. It took me a moment to pick together her strategy, but it seemed to work well for her. So that's why she'd glance over at my side anytime this happened. Occasionally, I'd see her nod or frown during those episodes, almost like she was having an internal conversation with herself. I didn't press her on this, and left her alone to organize her thoughts. There wasn't a rush for answers anyhow. Collected again, she turned back to me and explained that she didn't have powers like these outside her armor. It was odd to hear up until I remembered she's new to being deathless. Guess that's what the stuttering was about. We went on talking about more minor things after. Much better conversation than with Fido. Step by step, we made it to the entrance of the underpass. And then we hit another wrench. The problem with smart enemies is that they're smart. Capable of making up their own plans in the background and having the gall not to share any of it with us until the last second. Fido here knew he could get to where we're going faster than we could. He put that to use. Is this going to be a problem? I asked, patting the rock in front of me, where our supposed entrance into lower ground was supposed to be. Keyword being supposed. Fido had done some remodeling while we were taking our sweet time getting here. I couldn't see where the lizard was right now. Probably scrambling all the other ways in, or waiting for us to drop our guard while we tried dealing with this. It's possible we could cut away inside with our blades, Hecate said, frowning. I could tell she wasn't convinced. A moment later she confirmed it after getting a closer look. Unfortunately, it seems even with blades, there is too much stone to properly cut away in time. Lifting will also sap away our remaining energy faster. This path is non-viable. Do we happen to have a plan B? My hand knocked on the solid rock, but there's no way to tell how deep the cave-in went. I'll settle for C even, I'm not picky. I said, when Hecate didn't answer. This was the closest entrance to the local underpass. There are other entrances, however any that I have in memory, the Drake is likely to know about it as well. We need to either repair a fountain, or find a new unexplored way in. And all that within 2 hours before power cells are depleted. I nodded, humming sagely. So, by any chance, do we have a plan D? Asking for a friend. You have friends? Hecate asked, and she sounded genuinely surprised. I don't know if I should praise her for the deadpan delivery or feel insulted. I think I'll multitask. I do when I have the money for the payroll. Right now, I think my wallet got nicked. Remember, 1 in 10 humans. Hope you're okay with IOUs. Hecate shook her head, smiling softly. Last I counted, there are only 2 of us here and I am not a thief. As for our situation, there is another possible method. It will force the Drake to leave, or even donate its own cells to us if I have enough authority to compel the machine. Some kind of deathless power that lets you hypnotize machines? I thought your abilities were limited. My dream of riding on a lizard mount was back on the menu. What a great time to be alive. Something in that manner. However, the moment I play my hand, I will be revealed. Tuakar, the feather that commands this Drake, may follow directly. What a terrible time to be alive. I guess being hated by Tuakar was something else Hecate and I had in common. How did you piss him off, if you don't mind me asking? I have decided to follow certain paths that put me dangerously close to being declared an enemy," she said, and I could tell this was skirting on the edge of her comfort zone. I wanted to ask her more about what she meant by being declared an enemy. I'm assuming it'd be like what Atius went through, where the feather went out of his way to hunt him down again and again. But I didn't want to hassle her either. My curiosity could be set aside for now. I gave a shrug. Well, so long as we get out of here in one piece, I'm not going to complain. And talking about complaints, do we actually have any other option besides this machine tampering spell of yours? She shook her head. Damn. Was hoping she'd have something else, given the ideas popping into my head. Well, I've got an idea we can try out. Neither of us are going to like it much though, fair warning. FIDO's goals were pretty simple. Murder me and bring my dead body back to Tuekar. In order to get that done, it wanted to starve us out by waiting for our power cells to run dry, after which it could stalk us and murder us easily. Therefore, the best way to deal with FIDO, was to do exactly that, pretend we'd run out of juice. Even without armor, occult blades are still deadly. All we had to do was find a suitable location where we could force FIDO into stabbing range. And then stab him first. Easy. Hecate, understandably, was against the plan, but for reasons I hadn't anticipated. When the power cells are drained, I will not be able to move anymore, she said, leaning back on the tree trunk where we'd set up a camp to eat and rest. I know it might seem dumb to take on a drake without the speed of armor, but I've seen one killed up close before, I said. All we have to do is get it to focus on me, and while it's distracted, you can chop its head off. Armor or no armor, you don't need to hit like a speeder or move as fast as one to do damage. Occult blades will cut through anything no matter what kind of force is behind them. She shook her head. No, you don't understand what I mean. I cannot remove my armor. I won't be able to move without it. My head finally read between the lines of what Hecate was trying to tell me this whole time. Her speed rivaled the winter blossom technique for a reason. You're paralyzed? The armor's what's letting you move around. Hecate nodded. No wonder she'd been sensitive about that topic. The armor was reading her inputs the same way Journey did mine. This might be how the Imperator's Cathed's always talking about could move as fast, and why they were rare soldiers to run into. For them, wearing armor was far more permanent. Leave it to Imperials to be this hardcore. Assuming I was right on my guess here. But Hecate was a new deathless now. Can't you use your deathless powers to heal yourself? Another shake of her head. My power to heal will only work on others. Not myself. Not in this case. Then, if she ran out of power, she'd be stranded here, limp, at the mercy of any wild animal or machine that would pass by. What a horrible way to die. Either slow death from thirst, unable to move, or getting mauled, all while not being able to move either. Hecate could return to life after death, but that didn't mean her death wouldn't be painless. And I wasn't even sure if her return to life would fix her paralysis. Deathless were supposed to heal rapidly. If she wasn't healing, it might be some kind of a permanent wound that would follow her, no matter what. And she'd taken the risk of that fate, just to save me, a complete stranger. I guess that's why she's returned as a deathless. They were heroes for a reason. Can you use your hypnosis ability when your armor runs out of power? And how long does it take to cast? I asked. She took a moment to think and then nodded. When my armor power's down, I'll remain active for an hour or 3 more before going into a long sleep. The orders can be sent instantaneously. She'd go to sleep when her armor ran out of power? This was all kinds of strange. Unless your armor's working as a life support of some kind. It would make sense with her paralysis. Hecate nodded quickly. So it'll turn off mobility and conserve energy to keep her alive. Or the armor was a lot more morbid than I suspected and would put her under, so whatever painful death she'd go through, she wouldn't have to experience. Poor girl had it rough. Right, so here's my revised plan. We still do the decoy strategy, except once power runs out, we'll switch places and you'll be the decoy while I sulk around. If I'm not able to take out the Drake alone, hit it with the hypnosis as the last second option. I think I'll be able to kill it with what we've got to work with though. I would prefer if you do not kill the Drake. Hecate said. It is only following orders. You want to leave the giant killer robot running around? A nod. Just to be perfectly clear, you don't want us to kill the 10-foot-tall machine with claws and a giant laser? The one that's constantly asking us to die? That machine. She looked away. I know I do not have grounds to make an argument. I understand the stakes are against us. I know it will not change its mind within the hour, such a thing would need to be a gradual change and we do not have the time. The pause at the end of her speech here was telling me more than anything else she'd said. Despite that, with all that stacked up against us, she didn't want the Drake to get killed. Oi, Deathless are such a pain with their morals. Atius would have had an easier time tossing the Chosen and their luggage out of the airlock the moment they'd shown up. And now I'd need to deal with FIDO in a non-lethal way. I reached down and grabbed a few local supplies to make my point. Look, I've got pretty rocks, some quality dirt and a few sticks, I said, lifting a handful of sorry-looking twigs. One snapped and dangled from my hand. I tossed it all backwards. What do you want me to do here? Tie him up with some imaginary rope. She sunk deeper into herself, hugging her legs to her chest. I've made a lot of mistakes, some personal and some by my orders. Mistakes that have cost lives. I've come to realize how much that loss can weigh. If I can, I want to avoid adding more destruction into the world. If I had to fight FIDO without armor, a single swipe of his paws would send me straight into the afterlife, first class with all amenities paid for. And without journey's speed, I'd be slower to dodge besides having a time limit before my body grew tired. What Hecate was asking for was outright impossible. I took a deep sigh and contemplated how I'd pull this one off anyhow. I can't make any promises. Fighting without an armor is already strapping my right hand to my back and nailing my boot to the ground. But I'll see what I can do. She turned, looking almost incredulously at me, before her features morphed into a soft smile. That would be nice. Thank you. I know it's unlikely to happen. However, it means a lot to me you are considering my request. Are we good with blinding and deafening it? Not exactly the best follow-up sentence for the mood, talking about brutal mutilation. But times were tough, and I had a murder machine to befriend. That would be preferable to destroying it. Hecate said. It can repair those parts in time. Right. That's what we'll aim for. We've got swords with us, we could use those to cut down branches or through rocks. That might open up some good ideas to work with. Armor parts might be useful too. Journey has a lot of fabric we can make use of. Perhaps weaknesses in the Drake's shell can help. Hecate said, now animated and talking. Their vision suite has highly advanced telescopic features. However, it doesn't include a large section of the light spectrum. It can see far, but cannot see more than a human would. Only machines fitting the long-range support role in the lower strata have a full field of vision, including electromagnetic. Those would be far harder to fool. You're oddly knowledgeable about these specs. I said. Part of your past, or something you picked up as a deathless. She looked away, flinching again. I don't think I'll understand what she's fidgeting over. Someone with this much knowledge of machines should be flaunting that knowledge, in my opinion. I learned in my time among the army. She said, still avoiding my gaze. I waved a hand in surrender, not wanting to make her feel more called out. It's okay, I'm not going to probe you about your past. I'm just asking for more details if you have them on the Drake. I need everything I can get my hands on right now. She nodded. Their shells are powered by 4 separate power cells, one on each leg. Large wiring under their throats is where they channel power into their primary weapon. Any damage there will render their cannon too dangerous to use. Their front claws are highly mobile, but their rear claws are far more limited in range of motion. Their tail is their last weapon, capable of being swung in any direction, however it is not a critical component and can be safely cut off without damage. They have great pattern recognition to help track down targets. Any trail left behind, they will find and follow. I swear, she's like a walking encyclopedia of machine knowledge. Imperials took that saying about knowing the enemy and stepped it up to the logical conclusion here. This was beyond just keeping your enemies close. Next thing, Hecate will tell me what their favorite colors are, or what food they like to eat. What a laudable work ethic those golden stiffs had. Location, location, location. First things first, if we wanted any shot at the Drake, we had to remove the range advantage. That means either holing up in a tunnel, or finding a nook of trees that forced the critter to get closer. The second thing was the constant voice in the back of my head saying I was being monumentally stupid to go this far to avoid killing a machine. Just kill the Drake and call it an accident. Sure, Hecate will be sad, but even she was telling me earlier how difficult of a request this would be. That voice had to be squashed by sheer willpower. Was all this beyond stupid? Yes. Unequivocally. If I could get away with it, I'd kill the Drake without ever being in the same area. Leave it a mine to walk over or something civilized like that. But this was Hecate's wish, and I owed that girl a life already. Not to mention she'd staked possibly dying a slow, agonizing death in exchange for powering up Journey. Worse, I'd come to enjoy my time with her, which made it even harder to say no. I had to set my pragmatism aside for this one. We found a nice campground that was well obscured by trees that would serve well for what I had in mind. Which left only the third and last objective: we had to remove or hinder the Drake's mobility. Without the range, it had to get close. And tangling up its front paws would be enough to let us take some calculated stabs in the right place. I wasn't going to reinvent the wheel with the cave dweller tools I had to work with here. Instead, I banked on the more classic traps. Potholes. Hecate in this situation turned out to be a natural. She knew everything I could possibly ask about setting traps up. From what we could do with the tools we had here, to the best placements for them. She was like a living book, telling me all kinds of facts and tips to help the plan out. As expected of a forest hermit like herself, she knew how to survive out here. With swords, we could cut into the ground. And with Journey's cape as a tarp, we could stake it into the ground with solid branches and then layer the whole thing with dirt and sticks until it looked no different from the rest of the ground, especially in the low light of a campfire nearby. At the bottom of that hole was occult sharpened rocks that looked more like large thin triangles. Hecate confirmed the dimensions we'd need to cut in order to have the rock be sturdy enough to resist the dake's weight, while sharp enough to puncture through the plating. We made 3 until we ran out of cape to work with. 1 less than I'd hoped for, but enough to work with. Now, the only thing between me and the Drake would be a flimsy oversized shrub where I hid in, waiting for the right moment to leap out in surprise. Last part of all traps was the distraction and bait. For that part, I removed Journey plate by plate and put it back together, using cut branches and twigs as the skeleton. I had no helmet, so no way to hide that part, but I left the armor behind a tree. Journey had a lower skirt. It wasn't difficult to cut off a section and build a makeshift white flag. A bit of artistic license, and now it looked like my twin was holding onto a white flag and lazing back against the tree. Almost as if I were sleeping. The rest of the armor's features, including the missing head, wouldn't be noticed from the only direction the Drake could slink into here from. Some might call me a war criminal for abusing the white flag, to which I'd say that's a little harsh. I'm only dabbling in light war crimes here. Besides, the Drake started it. It certainly felt like someone was judging me. The entire time Hecate and I worked on setting up the trap, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. More to the point, ever since I'd woken up, I'd had that nagging sense. I'd mostly put it to Fido being Fido, because he really was watching us. Except right now, if it was Fido watching, he'd have already tried shooting at us or we would have seen his snout somewhere. There are not a lot of places to slink inside this little nook of the forest, which is exactly why we picked this spot. So where was this feeling coming from? Nerves were getting in the way. The only thing left was to wait until the guest of honor showed up and not think about my gut feelings here. That could be in the next hour or the next day, with no way to tell. Hecate climbed up a tree and promptly went to sleep like a cat. She told me she'd be dozing off like this to conserve energy, but she'll wake up if the Drake showed up. After which, the feral witch went to sleep on pure command. She made those branches look comfortable, given how limp she'd gone. I wasn't exactly sure how reliable Hecate would be on waking up in time. It depends on how sardonic the Drake was. If it showed up all high and mighty and started talking, that'll probably wake her up. But the Drake could also play the part of a stealthy hunter out to slit throats in the middle of the night, in which case I'll be alone against it at least for the first few seconds of the fight until Hecate woke up. I couldn't exactly shout to get her attention without also revealing where I was to the Drake. No matter what, there was a ticking time limit in which Hecate's power cells would run out just from idle operation. And given my luck, the Drake was probably taking its time breaking down all the ways to working power fountains before it got back to tracking us down. I had to prepare myself for the worst-case situation, in which I'd be alone, no armor, a single occult blade to my name and a few hastily made Stone Age traps to annoy Fido with. And if Hecate died in the fight or her suit ran out of juice to sustain her, there'd be no healing for whatever damage I took. No problem at all. What's the worst that could happen? Book 3, Chapter 37, Follow the Trail. The drake slithered slowly into the clearing, head rocking back and forth, taking slow steps. Greedy, but cautious. I hardly heard him arrive, and I had been on alert the entire time. He'd clearly taken detours before arriving here. Dirt and all kinds of twigs had gotten stuck around the body's chassis on all the nooks and crannies, evidence of it lurking around. It lumbered slowly past my position, the foliage around me having done the trick. Fido could have showed up days later once he was absolutely sure that we were drained of energy to fight with. Then again, I've seen machines chase me down to the ends of the earth only because I'd had the audacity to escape them. They can be vindictive little monsters and want nothing short of instant gratification. Hecate's survival knowledge on constructing traps, right down to the exact measurements needed for optimal rock impaling goodness, was a godsend. Like having access to a librarian who knew where all the good books were at. The engineer in me approved with 2 thumbs up. Once it caught sight of my decoy, white flag limp in the armor's hands, as if the owner were sleeping, the monster froze. Still a few steps away from the traps. Its mouth slowly opened and charged the laser. Look at him go. Didn't bother to gloat or talk. Just wanted me dead. I could respect that sort of focused mind. Regrettable that he didn't come closer to the traps, but I could make do. In the past, Father had waited until the monster had fired before he took action. Hindsight made it clear why they couldn't rapid fire that sort of beam. Each attack incurred a cooldown period. So the best time to fight a drake was when it couldn't threaten anyone with that beam. Once Fido made his move, I'd make mine. Hecate should join in right after, given the noise that his beam would make. If I angle myself right, the drake wouldn't have any other choice but to rush over the traps in order to get to me. Without range, Fido only had those claws to work with. Except the machine didn't follow the script. He had his own plan in mind. At the last moment, his head swung up, aiming straight into the canopy, right where Hecate would be sleeping. My blood froze as the beam speared through the tree, drilling a hole right through everything, trunk, branch, and leaves. The forest exploded into noise as flocks of birds flew off in a frenzy, away from where the beam of light had come from. A dark chuckle came from the beast. No sounds came from the singed branches above. In a single moment, he'd taken out Hecate. And now I was deep in the shit. The drake twisted its head to look in my direction. SSSSS. Did you think to trick a hunter? Did you think this was enough? I could feel the panic well inside and I crushed it ruthlessly with everything I had. Hecate would be fine. She's deathless. She'd return to life. I needed to focus and follow the script. Out here without armor, I felt weak and slow. But that's the life most surface scavengers. If they could do it, so could I. Atias's occult blade lit up, and I launched myself out of the shrub to the side. The plan was a bust, but the best I could do was follow through. Fido clawed the air, and I dodged backwards, taking careful steps to weave in between the traps, putting the danger zone between Fido and myself. He didn't move. No, instead he waited, grinning at me. SSSSS. Simple construction of dirt and wood, crafted in desperation. I can smell it from here, little child. It will not trick me. You have nothing. No one. No hope. Run, hide, or wait for but a moment longer. I will set you free, regardless. Didn't quite catch that. Got a bad ear. How about you come a little closer and try again? I said, gripping my sword and considering my options. Trying to throw my sword would be suicide in all but name, especially without armor to power my throw. If I tried to fight him, there's a chance I could fall into my trap in the scuffle. And the drake was clearly happy to sit and wag his tail on the other side, waiting for his primary weapon to charge again. Not to mention there was no chance to run from him. He could catch up even while I wore journey. The standstill remained for a few seconds until the drake snapped its head to the right and gave a surprised roar. Wings stretched out wide, Hecate leaped out from the forest, moving like a blur across the ground. 2 swords were ignited. She danced under his throat, 2 blurs of occult blue lighting the path she took, striking the monster's throat. A heartbeat later, she was well out of reach again, on the other side, gracefully turning around with a gust of wind from her wings. Swords raised up in challenge. Surrender. She simply said. Your primary weapon has now been disabled. Your mission's success rates have gone beyond acceptable conditions. The drake hissed. This changes nothing, little deathless. Time fades away for you both. And then Fido displayed a level of courage I hadn't expected from a machine of his size. The giant, looming monster turned and bolted away without another word. In all fairness, that was the smarter move to pick, which was damn annoying for us all. Hecate launched herself after it. Fido expected this, swinging his massive tail into a thinner tree, knocking it down in the path. That'd have worked pretty well if I had been chasing after him. But it did absolutely nothing to stop a deathless chasing after him, especially one with wings. She leaped straight in between tree branches as the whole thing fell down in a display of acrobatics even Kedra couldn't compete with. I sprinted after, clearing the trap zone and climbing my way through the broken trees to see what was happening. On the other side, Hecate had her wings stretched out wide, shimmering with power as she crouched on the ground, about to leap forward. Instead, she stopped, standing back up slowly, the floating metal slivers collapsing back to hug her waist. I caught up to her in a moment. "You're letting Fido get away?" I asked, watching the drake move in the distance, already bounding over a smaller mountain path and vanishing from sight. "If we don't deal with him right now, we won't get a second chance. I could chase after him, and there is a high possibility that I would catch up and defeat the drake before my power ran out." She looked around before slowly ending her gaze on me, and I understood what she was implying. "But you don't know what would happen to me if you left," I said. Hecate nodded. "You are outside of armor now. And there's been a significant amount of time since the drake's last contact with us. It might have reached out and found new lessers to join rank. Pulling me away from you is a possible plan the drake could have intended on if it failed to kill me. After which, whatever help it had recruited would have shown up to finish the job." We both stood in silence, watching the trail where the drake had fled off to. Now we were deep into it. "I am sorry, Keith," she said. "I should not have attempted to avoid killing the drake. This was the only chance we had to destroy it, and I squandered it." "It's fine," I said, patting her shoulder. "I know you were torn up about how to deal with Fido. We'll get him in another way." Hecate turned to me. "We have a plan E?" she asked. I flashed her a grin. "Not at all. But I'm sure we'll figure something else." We did not, in fact, figure something else. Which meant I needed to dig down and use the occult as the official plan E. No other way about it. There were fractals within Journey's armor that I could leverage into armaments of sorts. I knew where all the plates containing the important fractals were inside Journey's armor. I could extract them all, in theory. I'd need to wire up an electric switch, or keep them all online permanently, but that wasn't impossible either. If I got out of this alive, I needed to figure out how to fight without an armor for the future. Maybe I could make an occult staff, with all the fractals written out on plates the staff carried, and electric switches to manually turn them on or off. At least with that I could use the more simple spells. An occult weapons platform would also work, something that could cycle through different plates to use with a lever. A necklace for the soul fractal would work well. A few rings with fractals written out on them and toggles embedded, or some kind of plate on the back of my hand. It's only now that I'm stuck out here with only twigs to work with that I'm thinking up of all the ways I could be the biggest pain to my next enemy. The issue was Hecate. I'm reasonably sure I could share with her I knew about the occult, given that she's a deathless, and saved my life. The only ones I'm supposed to be careful about were warlocks and their guild. The question was if I should drag her with me, given her own time limit. It didn't take long for me to figure out the answer to that. "We should split up," I said after having mulled it over, around the dying embers of our campfire. It was bittersweet, but I've already taken much more than I should have any right to ask for. You need a new power source and you don't have time to waste on this little grudge match. The drake doesn't care about you. It's after me. You don't need to get involved. While the drake and I get to know each other, you can use that time to get closer to the next power source." She stayed silent for a moment, before matching my gaze with a frown. "There's a high chance you will perish before I can return. That isn't acceptable. I'm pretty good at running. Who knows, I might be able to escape the drake. I've got a few extra tricks to throw at it. I'm full of surprises." "You won't escape a drake," Hecate said sternly. "They are hunters, specifically created to track down humans. It will know where to look for you. There are patterns most humans will follow. Even if you break those patterns, it will only gain a few additional hours as the drake reorients itself. This plan will lead to your death, If you tag along with me, there's a chance you die. Heading our own ways here is the best chance you've got to getting out of this without dying. And I do have my own set of teeth, more than just this old sword. I said. Look, we're both in a tight spot here, but at least you can make it out. She stared at me as if I were an idiot. I am deathless. Dying means very little to me. However, if you die, you will not return. Additionally, I have debts to pay. Someone who's grown to be important to me would be hurt if I left you to die. What, me personally? A day ago you didn't know who I was. I said, curiosity growing. She gazed out in the distance for a moment, contemplating an answer. I've made a choice to help save your life. Part of it was my initiative, another part was by my mentor of kinds. A pact was made. I owe it to him to stay true to my word. I hummed, ah, that's what you mean. Likely some kind of undersider vow to help those who need help, like the ones we had on the surface. And Hecate was willing to fight to the death to uphold her ideals. Being deathless, she literally could do that. Then again, she was injured in a way that deathless typically are not. When Lord Atius was killed by Tuekar the first time, he'd returned to life without his armor or any of his equipment. If that happened to her, would she find herself stranded and paralyzed out there? Have you died before, as a deathless? I asked, leaning back on the tree, trying to figure out how to probe for answers. What's the process like? She didn't turn to look at me, instead her gaze drifted up the canopy. I have died, once. When I returned there were others to help guide me. Friends. Ah, yes. Those. I'm afraid we're fresh out of stock here. What are you doing out in the middle of nowhere anyhow, leaving everyone behind like that, given your paralysis? I'm sure others would have come with you to help you find the might speakers. Hecate shook her head. It was Tuekar. I knew he was after someone. And only I could move fast enough to keep up with his ability to portal. No one else could keep up. Did she see the battle between Tuekar and Lord Atius? She must have seen what happened when I'd been tossed off the cliff if she could fly. So you picked to save me, over diving into the fight with Tuekar and getting him there. Hecate nodded. I calculated that given the forces that he had to fight, the likely result is his retreat. Weakened as he was, his abilities allow him great freedom in escaping dangerous situations. Joining the fight would not have made a significant difference to the overall result. She paused, sighed, and shook her head. No, I am not being completely honest. I was hesitant to confront him directly. Doing so would be a path of no return. So you went and helped me out, since if he's trying to kill me, that's a good enough reason to save me, since it'll piss him off indirectly. I said. So long as you don't get spotted as the one helping me out. Hecate smiled at that. Yes. Something like this. I've discovered that spite remains a strong motivator. Although it seems to have turned directions. A brief silence fell around us. I couldn't completely understand what she was talking about, but Hecate was already strange in many ways, and I didn't want to tread too deeply into her past. We hadn't figured out any way out of this together. The drake would not show its scaly face around for another day or two, probably making absolutely sure we had nothing to fight it with anymore. Maybe we could try to wait it out anyhow. I asked. I can hunt and gather food for us outside of armor, and you keep everything in the lowest power setting possible. You can probably last a long time with just a trickle of energy. The drake will come back after enough time to try its luck again, and this time, we'll need to kill it off in one hit. Hecate was about to answer when her head twisted to her side while she jumped up into action, swords flashing out. When I looked for myself to see what had startled Hecate, I could barely see something in the darkness. The blur of motion. It wobbled into the firelight. An empty hover sled. Bouncing lightly in the air and moving directly our way at a steady pace, as if someone had outright kicked it this way. Are you seeing that? I asked. Or was what we ate earlier not perfectly healthy? The sled lazily glided over, eventually stopped by her hand, making me at least happy this was a mutual hallucination. Her eyes roamed around the forest, searching for the source. Whoever is out there, reveal yourselves. She commanded. No answer came from the forest. So we had to find answers from the empty sled itself. It looked odd. There were decorations around it, sigils and colors painted on the side. A lot of scratch marks all over, some having been painted over, others more fresh. Dust marks at the bottom showed where older boxes clearly had been stacked before there, cleared off recently. I couldn't tell exactly how old this was, but I could tell it's seen a heavy amount of use, likely daily. The built-in storage compartment had been cut out, and given the precision, that had to be an occult blade doing the work. Inside the interior was one power cell, rolling around with the green-gold solution glowing softly inside. Rolling softly at the bottom of the sled were two large wooden rods, each with handles on one end, cut with precise angles telltale of that occult blade again. At the keel of the sled was something more interesting. A scratched-out sentence in large font with a surprising amount of flourish. Follow the trail. Book 3, Chapter 38, Joyride. The loose power cell rolling around inside had a full charge, and according to Hecate, was likely someone's reserve cell. Primary cells would have seen some amount of use, while this one looked freshly filled up. If there was any doubt this was some kind of gift from the gods, that answered that. Nothing else but a free power cell when we most needed it. Someone's been watching us, I said, worried. Looking around the broken treeline and finding nothing. No footprints, no sounds, even the mythical birds had stopped making noises after the drake had beaten a retreat. Hey, Hecate, you're the expert on everything underground. Do mysterious ghost sleds usually show up like this now and then? No. This is abnormal. I detect nothing in range of us either. Hecate said at my side, equally puzzled. She took a few hesitant steps in the direction where the sled had appeared from, vanishing from my point of view into the tree trunks, swords at the ready. She returned a few moments later, carrying what looked to be a metal trinket of some kind. This was affixed to a tree trunk at the end of the path the sled took. I found no other tracks, or footprints nearby. Getting my hands on it and spinning it around, I could tell almost immediately what this was. A rudimentary spring-powered push, wound up on a timer. If it was affixed to a tree, the sled was likely pushed forward by this. And given the timer, I'd guess whoever owned the sled was long gone by the time the spring was released. They must have known we'd be stranded at our campsite for some time, likely soon after we'd dealt with FIDO and started brainstorming possible ways out given the timer. How did this even get that close to us without our notice? I asked. We were running around the clearing for a while now setting up traps for FIDO. How did we not notice a god's damned hover sled hanging about? Hecate seemed even more worried about this than I was. She confirmed she had no idea how this got past our notice, or even when. And she's the one with the feral abilities to sniff out anything within a mile radius. What could hide a hover sled from the occult-granted vision powers of a deathless? I gave the old sled a more critical look through, checking for bombs and other nefarious items that would ruin the atmosphere of a nice gift. The wooden rods inside were likely to be used as a paddle, so that the hover sled could be used like a boat from the older eras, except on land. Very archaic method of moving, but beggars can't be choosers in this case. Whoever our benefactor was, they'd clearly given us something to work with at the least. Which means they not only know we're running short on energy, they also know we can't move much at all right now. More evidence in the camp that whoever the owner was, they'd been watching over us for some time now. The sled was wide enough to fit 2 or 3 people inside comfortably. However, it didn't have 2 seats, or any seats at all. Just a standard cargo hauling sled, except with a lot of paint on it. Odd-looking tribal art decorated the sides and interior, more abstract shapes of colors. Painting wasn't something I see every day, meaning this hover sled was someone's expensive little toy. A smaller reserve of power cell fluid kept the hover sled afloat, about 1/4 of the standard supply in a cell. And there wasn't a bomb strapped anywhere inside, or the underside. Reasonably sure of that after poking my nose around for a few minutes and not getting blown up as my evidence. The scratches on the side and insides were too small to fit the claws of FIDO, so it's unlikely he's involved in any of this. And besides, his current plans of not doing anything but waiting for us to run out of juice was working out fine. Why complicate it? Hecate and I had no guesses for what follow the trail meant, but this sled opened up a lot of options for the newly minted plan. Hecate and I split the new power cell in half, with the Deathless keeping the cell for her armor, given she'd donated her spare to help power Journey. What's the plan now? I asked. Are we going to continue the search for a fountain using the mysterious spooky sled? Talking about the Deathless, she was already climbing aboard and stabilizing said sled using a rod, without a pause even. Most our energy expenditure is spent on moving our mass. With this hover sled, we can remain stationary and use the longer sticks for propulsion and steering. It will be far more efficient. We may even cover ground faster than walking. She frowned suddenly, turning to gaze to my side as if I'd said something offensive. Assuming we coordinate together correctly, I don't see how this would be a disaster. You underestimate my ability to turn anything into a disaster, I said and turned my attention back to business, climbing aboard the strange sled myself. If Hecate hadn't exploded, neither would I any idea what follow the trail meant. She shook her head. I am as confused as you are. However, we need to move before the Drake returns and we do not have other options to explore. Technically, we do, I said. We do not have any acceptable options, she corrected, giving me a stern glare before I could remind her about splitting up. Fine, you twisted my arm here. I grabbed a rod and gave an experimental tug against the ground. The sled started gliding across the remains of our campfire. Hecate and I both made movements at the same time next. She turned the sled to go left while I did the same, except to go right. The result was us spinning around like a dawdle. Took a more coordinated effort to get the sled back under control. Want to draw straws on who leads? I asked once the spinning stopped, reaching down for a few twigs to work with. On my honor, I'll accept any result, so long as it's one where I win. She answered that with a frown. What? I asked, getting the sticks ready. I have just been given advice to flick you on the forehead, she said, with deadpan delivery, as if completely serious. Who's giving you such shocking and violent advice? I shot back, lifting up the sticks and offering her to take one. I want a word with them. Hecate's faint smile froze, and faded away. As if realizing I could see her, she turned her face away and gazed out to the treeline instead. I couldn't tell what was going through her mind from this angle, but I had a sinking feeling I'd done something. I will arrange this, she said, sometime in the future. I owe you that much. Then, she shook her head. Soon. Neither of us are ready for that step as of now. She turned back to me and swiftly plucked out a stick from my hand all in one motion. I don't know how she could tell, but she'd drawn the short stick expertly, almost like she'd memorized which stick was which before I could. You can lead if you wish, she mumbled out. More like an apology, and less like a suggestion, while I was still trying to wrap my head around what all of that was about. Where do I even start to try to unpack that sentence? I don't understand this girl at all. Not a single bit. To be fair, I'm aware I can be dense at times. Kedra had clued me in already, usually with thrown objects. And if she were here, she'd probably pick something particularly heavy. URS helped me make sense of this all. We ended up deciding to let her take the lead. She had better eyesight and was more coordinated. I'd intended on that from the start anyhow, the sticks were for fun from the start. It was a little rough going. I say that because we nearly ran ourselves into a tree trunk first thing, which made us seriously consider just having us use her wings as propulsion, or kick behind us. Both options Hecate had shot down since they were energy intensive according to her. But apart from the dented tree trunk, it turned out to be a good thing. We discovered what follow the trail meant. The tree trunk we'd nearly collided with had a cross mark on it. And looking further into the distance, we could see more trees with scratches embedded inside. A mixed blessing. We clearly had someone trying to help us out, except this path could be equally followed just as easily by the Drake. So, Hecate and I decided on the only reasonable course of action. Commit fully to this plan and roll with what happens later. If we were quick enough to follow the trail, we might make it before Fido comes back from his nap or whatever he was doing to pass the time while waiting for us to starve. Being a deathless, Hecate could move her own paddle rod quicker than I could and with greater precision. But both of us had to work together to keep the sled moving in the right way. Learning how to work together was less than ideal. Especially since turns required both of us to work together if we were to take those at any speed faster than walking. She'd often use her wings to help adjust course, but over time the corrections were less needed until we had the hang of it. A shame really, the wings were really pretty to look at in action. On the other hand, the hover sled could cruise around at a pretty fast pace if both of us pushed hard enough. Faster than I could run without armor, at least. If we were bold, we probably could make this move faster than a relic-assisted sprint. The issue was all the trees surrounding us, no clear path. Whose sled do you think this is? I asked as we paddled our way through the red forest. That's the part I'm most spooked about. Random sleds in the middle of a might forest sounds more like something from a horror story, generally. What is your current theory? Hecate asked by the front, correcting our course with small taps now and then. Mites. It's got to be mites. Anytime there's something strange going on underground, it's usually because mites are a thing. She nodded. I could see why you would believe that. Mites could have constructed such a sled in the forges. However, colonies do not move objects. They only create or destroy. If they were around, we would see the full colony in action around us. The forest was devoid of any lights, beyond those that came from the stream for ambience or had been crafted by the mites specifically to light up certain elements. The only thing stirring in the forest were animals going about their business. So, what's your theory? I asked. The scratched sentence was written in a standardized font. Notice how all the letters remain exactly perfect to their counterparts? I believe whatever entity has been watching us is of machine origin. Only they can have this level of precision. A machine helping us? Don't think that's possible. Machines are unified together. Giving us a hover sled would go directly against FIDO's plans. They wouldn't work against each other like this. Hecate shook her head. The reality is more complicated. For additional proof, the wooden rods themselves show no sign of rot and the interior is still slightly wet. These were cut from a branch recently, as little as a few hours before we discovered the sled, in these woods. There are no table tools here to work with. Where are you going with that? And what do you mean by more complicated? Don't like those two words, especially put together. I said, dipping the rod to the other side and matching her pushing speed as we glided through the forest. Notice how both rods are uniform to one another, precisely cut. Again, no human craftsman would be able to mimic this degree of precision with a freehand tool such as a standard occult blade. Oh. That was a good point. Maybe a machine malfunctioned and went rogue. Gods, that was weird to think about. A crazy machine out there, helping us. Odd that they haven't shown their face yet. Shy. It could be that their presence isn't something the Drake is aware of, and our helper wishes to remain undercover. I can understand and relate to that. Hecate said. Machines that do not conform to the current will, are hunted down and destroyed. You say that as if it's a known and usual thing. Do machine traders actually exist? I asked, a little shocked. Hecate nodded, keeping her back to me while she steered the sled. They do. She said softly. I know one. More things about Hecate that explained why she was so adamant that there could be peace. I took a moment to really process that revelation, but Hecate wouldn't lie, she was deathless. Deathless don't lie. A part of me wanted to believe her implicitly, and it was at war with the part of me that just knew machines were a united faction out to kill all humans. It was a short and bloody battle of conflicting ideals, with the latter side losing decisively against the former. Mites were machines, and they weren't allied with relinquished. Thus the base case is proven that there exists some machines that aren't out to kill humans. Humans had all kinds of factions running around, machines could be similar in their own way, even among relinquished's army. There were billions of machine soldiers out there lurking about, plenty of chances for some of them to get uppity ideas. Statistically speaking. Assuming they weren't digitally lobotomized to follow orders. There was one last hiccup to solve here, about the sled itself. What's with all the paintings then? That doesn't look like something machines would do. Looked a lot like the ad hoc sort of paintings under the colony, in the paths leading to sealed-off sections. At that, Hecate shook her head. I am unsure. The paint appears to be old, however, I cannot narrow down the date. She had an odd look to her features at this, one hand lightly brushing over the painted decorations that lined the different parts of the sled. We continued to glide on a steady course, hardly slowing down. No need to push with rods right now. Every now and then, we'd coordinate a turn or add more speed and then let the whole thing coast. Rather relaxing, all said and done. Beats walking for sure. Whoever owned this sled had a fully developed personality. Hecate eventually said in the lull. That does not appear without time and experience. If the owner is a machine, it must be an older one. And it clearly took great care of this sled in their own way. Only, I can't understand why. We'd reached the end of the mite forest soon enough. What lay before us? Well, it was something. At least the forest had remained within the bounds of regular physics and what I'd seen in archives of the world. A little too picture perfect, but somewhat possible. Our hover sled silently drifted out of the woods, being directed by occasional prods of our rods. Beyond us was a white sea of silver flowers stretching across miles, dancing softly to the breeze that made shimmering waves of reflected artificial moonlight. As if we were coasting on reflective ice. While most of the plains was reasonably solid ground under all the flowers, there were parts of it that absolutely were not. Massive stone obelisks of pure black glass jutted up in diagonal directions, scattered around the landscape. A deep pool of murky white mist surrounded each pillar base, bobbing up and down with the breeze passing by. Some of these pillars were about 5 times as tall as I was. Those were the smaller ones. Mites did not like building things tiny. Reminded me of the white wastes with their occasional distant ruins, except not as deadly. So long as we did not factor FIDO into it. Right now, this wide open terrain made me feel nervous and exposed. Worse, without tree trunks, the path that had been steadily leading us forward was gone. We were now adrift. Think those pillars have the path markings? I asked Hecate. She gazed in the direction of the nearest one. No, she said. And we should beware to approach them. The mist under the pillar shows no ground under it. I suspect they are a free fall to the next level, the onyx pillars are hovering in place. If we are careless, the sled can fall through the ground. I whistled. That's some eyesight you got. Eat a lot of carrots or something. Carrots? Carrots will not improve your eyesight. She said, confused for a moment. I raised my eyebrows at her, expecting her to clarify the occult sight she had. She got the message perfectly, and launched into a short lecture on exactly why carrots wouldn't do me any good. Well, I feel cheated. I said, after she'd wrapped up her quick and oddly informative essay. Should have suspected those agri-farmers were lying through their teeth about that. But back to the actual issue at hand here, what direction do we pick now, Captain? Hecate stayed seated, the rod resting on her legs. The hover sled was very energy efficient, only a few taps, and the thing would continue to glide forward for at least a good 3 to 4 minutes before it slowed. Most of our work had been steering the slippery thing, which never slowed us down too bad since she had wings to use as last resort. I suggest we remain in the last direction. She said, keeping a watchful eye ahead of us. My armor has a compass. I can maintain our path. Time to speed up, then? I asked, grabbing my rod. She took hers up as well, and we both dipped the rough tips into the ground, pushing off in a controlled manner. The trick was to constantly compensate. Hecate's armor let her move at a very linear pace, so all I had to do was increase or decrease my push, depending on if our sled was slipping off a direction. She'd act as the rock that I'd match pace with. Do Undersiders sing any songs? I asked as our sled gained more and more velocity across the plains. Music. She hummed, we know of it. However, I do not believe my people have made music. That's a little odd. Dip the rod, push off against the ground, increase speed. Smooth sailing. Everyone has some kind of culture. Food, music, architecture, games, fashion, and art. I've never been to the Undersider cities yet, but they'd have to have something. Were you more of a shut-in? Hecate stayed quiet. Her rod once more dipped into the sea of flowers, and began to push at the steady constant rate I'd grown used to. Something of the kind. She said, looking up to the distant ceiling. I have been questioning why I've enjoyed my time among the Undersider cities so much. I think it was because of the culture. It was something that my people don't have yet. Were Imperials different from Undersiders? Cathita had explained all kinds of rituals and quirks of being a crusader. They had their own entire little world. Where did Hecate come from that she never noticed that? Or maybe her sect was something far more closed off to the world. The armor remained stubbornly quiet, the helmet still missing. No way to ask Cathita about anything until we got to the Might Fountain and had the time to regrow a new helmet. Not sure I follow, I said, matching the speed and sending our sled going across the wide plains faster. Small hills had started to form, which made our sled climb up and down softly as we passed ground. Were you part of some garrison that did nothing but run around and pick fights with people? Yes. She said without a pause, some of us had more to do in between fights. However, others like myself only went to sleep in between battles. What sort of life did these imperial elites live? Fight, sleep, repeat? Was the regiment she was part of something that she was born into? Like a child soldier of some kind? Explains why she's so desperate to make peace work, even between machine and humanity. How'd she end up being tied to Tuakhar, the Chosen, a machine trader she knew, Imperials, and Mites? And she knew all kinds of odd trivia, like carrots and crime statistics, all while being a feral hermit witch that ate wood skewers and rocks, if they looked tasty enough. Just what sort of person had I run into? I was missing something key, and I knew it. The more I learned about her past, the stranger it got. The contradictions were piling up like crazy. Starting to make me feel crazy just by proximity. Hecate's hand brushed over the painted tribal decorations around the sled absent-mindedly. The part near her armored hand looked like a giant shark with a crazed purple eye chasing after a pack of blue wolves, except they had far too long legs to be wolves. The entire sled was filled with pictograms like this, all flowing from every direction. There was no text, but I was sure some kind of story was written down here if I spent a few hours trying to put everything together. You know, surface clans all have hundreds of songs for different moments. Some to pass the time. Others to tell a story. All of our scriptures are made to be sung, for example. I said, trying to lighten up the mood. Sort of like this sled here keeps a history of some kind written out, surface clans do the same with songs. She didn't seem to have any opinion on that right now, keeping a blank face. We spend a lot of time traveling across giant empty stretches of land, usually sitting on the side of an airspeeder for hours, so we figure out ways to keep busy over our comms. We've got word games and rhyme dances too. Want to learn some? I am unsure I would be very good at singing. Hecate said. You'll never know if you never try. The sled had reached maximum speed we could get to with rods. It was a good enough pace to make anyone worried about tripping, but nowhere near what Teed's ship could get to. Under us, the silver flowers passed by so quickly they blurred together. It was like a shimmering wave of reflected light was following right behind us, keeping pace. And the plains here stretched for miles before we'd reach the distant mountainside. We had at least a good half hour. Good thing we had a sled, walking all this would have been impossible. Hecate drew her rod back over her legs and folded her hands over it as we waited for the sled to slow down enough to use the rods again. Very well. She finally said. Teach me a song. I made another discovery about my traveling companion, she could remember everything explained to her. Not in the normal way either. Over the half hour of sailing, I never needed to repeat lyrics a single time. She'd pick them up as if she'd had the sheet music slate in front of her to read from. Ridiculous, but somehow not surprising. This wasn't even close to the weirdest thing about her. Completely tone deaf without some practice though, but she improved that part rapidly. Mostly I picked fun light-hearted tunes and stories to go over, to keep the morale up. Great time all in all, until we reached closer to the mountainside. That's when Hecate's gaze snapped off to the side, as if she'd spotted something dangerous far ahead. I gave a look myself to see what had prompted the change in plan and got an immediate answer. There was something in the distance by the mountainside. A light, glowing blue. It vanished from view a moment later. Did you see that? I asked, pointing. Hecate nodded, and looked properly spooked for the first time since I'd known her. Yes. What was it? I can't see that far off, it looked just like a wink of blue light to me. The profile I could detect from this distance matches closest to that of a runner model. A what? A machine, the ones you call a screamer. Undersiders and their jargon again. Or maybe that was Imperial jargon, since father had told me Undersiders called them screamers too. There was one issue with all this though. I thought machines all had violet lights. I asked. They do. She seemed almost stunned at the news. This one does not. Book 3, Chapter 39, Numbers in the Dirt. We spent some time going over the distant figure we'd spotted for only a few seconds. Hecate's eyesight was really something else, she's able to remember all the small details she saw within that single glimpse. It was wearing decorations, and carried a staff of some kind with a glass box hooked at the end. A smaller light, or painting of some kind was within that box. It vanished from all visible spectrums after wrapping something around itself. A blanket to hide the light. She drew out her pole, lowering it while keeping it not deep enough to touch anything solid. The flowers that zipped past under us swallowed the wood from view. I was unable to tell. There were many other additional silhouettes of equipment that could throw off my conclusion. Machines don't wear trophies or trinkets, at least, none of the ones I've run into. Though I suspect a few wanted my head for a trophy. One in particular had chased me halfway across the world all because I had the audacity to smack talk it through a sealed door. Well, after cutting off its leg with said door. Good times. I have not met any machines that did either. Wearing items and clothing is a new concept to machines. Hecate said softly, frowning. And nothing I know of has invisibility. None of the more powerful lower strata machines are capable of that either. Are we sure this is a machine and not someone dressing up with machine parts? I asked. No. The size and expected center of gravity do not match any possible way that fits a human under the plates. I tutted, thinking. You're sure it didn't just hide the lights with a cloak and walk out of line of sight? No. The target vanished completely while remaining stationary. This had occult rat shit written all over it. Wait, I've got a theory. About the sled and the new machine. I said, connecting a few odd dots together. Let's say this figure you saw was our mysterious benefactor, the owner of this sled. You said it's likely a machine that took care of this, right? If this machine has been sneaking around using an invisibility cloak of some kind, then the only thing that could give it away would be footsteps left behind. So, the best way to avoid leaving footprints behind, is to float over the air. I patted the side of our sled. This machine would be like the boatman of death, stalking across the lands unseen by any. Eerie. That theory could fit. Hecate said. I did not detect any footprints by the base of the trees we were following, however there were broken branches above the tree line. A machine could have been jumping from branch to branch. This hover sled might not be a cargo hauler at all. Maybe it worked more like someone's home? Saved by a strange machine that's gone rogue and learned how to hide. Hey? Odd turn of events, but I can roll with this. I shrugged. Better than being murdered by FIDO at least. If I died somewhere here, I didn't want to give that bastard the satisfaction. And it seemed our benefactor had the same motivations, or at least didn't want to even chance a fight. Hecate gave a quick nod, her eyes never leaving the ridge where the light had vanished. This machine must be older. Except I am unsure how much older. There was a trailing tone in her voice that made me think she did have an idea of the machine's age, only that the answer seemed too unbelievable to her senses. Why would a machine decide to stick its neck out for us? Hecate frowned. I suspect I may have something to do with this. What, did you accidentally sweet-talk a machine at some point in your past? Her frown turned deeper. No. However, I have been part of events that may have caused a commotion. All right, if that's the case, I think we should turn this sled in that direction. I said, snapping her out of her thoughts, pointing at where the figure had vanished from. If had God's damned invisibility as a power, then allowing you to spot it was deliberate. I agree with your idea. Hecate said, after considering. It likely wants us to approach in that direction. I am unsure how safe this path will be, however. FIDO's still out there and we are already committed to this plan anyhow. Besides, weren't you the one advocating for machines in the first place? Well, there's your rogue machine defector. Honestly, I hadn't thought it could be possible, but without knowing more information, it really seemed like there were at least some machines that had gone their own way. It was fascinating. While I hated machines like any clansman would hate slavers, there was something about machines that drove me to curiosity. If I had a chance, I'd have spent time breaking down a few to see what sort of things made them tick. Or at least have a nice conversation, preferably with someone more civil than FIDO. The mountain grew wider as we came closer, until we spotted a small opening by the base, right under where the blue light had been twinkling from. A perfectly cut block of stone leading down into darkness, nestled in the shadow of a larger rock. Had we not been approaching dead-on in that direction, it would have been easy to miss really. If we had picked any other direction to go from our initial starting point, we'd have missed this entirely. Think that leads to the underground fountain? I asked, helping the sled come to a full stop. Hecate nodded, taking a step off the sled and onto solid ground. My map shows that there is a deeper tunnel that should be going under this section of rock. It's highly possible that this new path has been cut to connect to that section. The clean-cut cube path went straight down at an incline, where it reached the walls of the actual tunnel. Couldn't quite see what was at the other end, given how dark it was. Hecate drew out her swords and walked right in without a second thought. To be expected, really, there weren't a lot of things out here that were scarier than she was. It didn't take long for the path to connect with the more organic tunnels of the mites. The further we went, the safer we felt. FIDO was already too fat to fit inside the current tunnels, and they continued to narrow down until it was too much for even the hover sled to fit through. We had to abandon it. I patted the floating chunk of metal fondly. Going to miss you, my pretty, don't tell the over hover sleds, but you were my favorite all along. Hecate seemed confused for a moment, then lit up with a smile. Do you tell all your hover sleds this? Only gullible innocent hover sleds. I shrugged, then leaned in conspiratorially. Don't tell your mother about me. I think I'm not popular with parents. A little too late. She's already ordered your execution, she said with a nervous chuckle, equipping her helmet in order to trigger the headlights. Outright death just for being around you, I said, following behind. Harsh parents. Do they keep you on a leash too, or let you go outside for a few hours on the weekend? It's complicated. Hecate answered, my immediate family has issues, as I've come to learn. Is that why you're miles out in the wilderness looking for might speakers? Understandable really. Have I told you some stories of my old family? They were a very colorful bunch. The might fountain room itself was grand, with structures that made the entire thing look like a sunken cathedral, trapped inside rock. At the center was the source itself. And more importantly, it was working with no holes punched into it. Hecate went first, sliding a power cell into the socket, watching the cell start to refill. It will take some time to power all our cells, she said. This terminal's throughput has been throttled from nearby power sources, however the ones leading from the underground remain functional. Wow, Fido was a piece of work. He wasn't happy enough breaking all the entryways? No, he had to make sure to ruin our day even if we did make it to the fountain. Persistent bastard. Hecate nodded. It will not stop until it has completed its mission. You know, the offer to split ways still stands, I said. You can continue looking for a might speaker without having to worry about the Drake. With my armor back online, I'm pretty confident in my chances against one. She shook her head. At this point, it has already painted me a target due to my interference. And death is not a concern for me, I am deathless. I shrugged, looking around the room for a spot to sit down and relax. What's it like, being a deathless anyhow? The only other deathless I know, they say he woke up with a note in his hand from his past self, asking for help. My eyes scanned around the broken walls until I found a few stone benches that looked comfortable enough. It would take some time to refill all the cells we had, after all. Might as well pass the time talking. Do you remember what kick-started the process for you? I'm faster, stronger and more capable than I used to be. But to become who I am, I died, she said, walking over and taking a seat next to me, watching the might fountain, wings folding back to hug her waist. No grand mission to carry out? No voices from the gods telling you where to be or some such? She paused, thinking. There was a mission. That is why I need to find a might speaker. I was given a prophecy of sorts to complete, from the mites. Now things were making more sense, and less sense. So your deathless transformation had something to do with mites? She nodded. I could have sworn deathless were closely allied with Psuya. Could there be more kinds of deathless? So that's why you need to find a might speaker. I hummed, letting another piece of info click into place. Quick question, do mites work with machines too? They have communicated and worked with the machines in the past, yes. Hecate said. They have worked with Psuya and relinquished in equal amounts as far as I know. They seem to work with anyone who offers them the right incentives. How about our rogue defector out there? Think the mites might have put it up to the task of getting us out of the ice? Sounds like you're working with the mites, and you being stuck in this predicament might have had them calling in some favors. That is possible. I need further clarification, however I am afraid that I might be caught if I attempt to speak to them directly again. Hecate said. The way I spoke to them before could be traced and easily spotted. It was something I did in desperation. If I do so again, relinquished might catch me. Details. She shook her head. I'm sorry, that's something I need more time before I can explain. I shrugged, taking the hint and switching the topic. I've always been interested in the mites, never had the time to really sit down and try to find out more about them yet. Life's been hectic back home. What are they like? They are a collective of smaller intelligences, each following one designated task. However, as a collective, they become more. In times past, the mites were a neutral party that was only interested in construction and destruction. Tsuyua had mentioned nobody controlled the mites. Guess the little buggers got bored just making theater props. I have very little evidence related to the mites. She continued. I know they are unreceptive to machines in general as of the current era, however that may have not always been the case. One thing is clear, they are a powerful faction and seem under constraints of some kind by their nature. I looked around the room, with all the beautiful statues crafted into the walls and broken fountains that still somehow functioned. Everything looked shaken down, walls collapsed and bricks strewn around from whatever impact broke them off. As if an earthquake had destroyed the sanctity of this location, and sank the whole area into the ground. Mites had the power to make all this, but their colonies were completely passive to anything moving around. I do not believe they can directly affect events in the world. Hecate continued. They work through intermediaries instead, in the rare cases they take interest to the world at large. How did they sound like? Were you able to talk back to them? She hummed, looking up, thinking. The small pieces of her wings tapped lightly together, as she thought. It was as if a million voices all said the same message in 1,000 different languages, except each language is one you do not know, yet understand anyhow. That's rather poetic. How do the mite speakers keep their heads together if they're talking to something like that? It was overwhelming, even with my mental abilities. Normal humans are likely unable to keep their heads together, as you put it. Mite speakers, as far as the Undersiders have reported to me, are castaways with mental illness. It isn't known if they truly speak to the mites at all or are simply deluded. After my experiences, I believe there might be a truth behind the mite speakers. They must have found some method to speak to the mites. What was the prophecy they spoke to you about? If you don't mind me asking. Hecate took a breath, and looked to her side, gazing off again while she considered her answer. Finally, she nodded. I don't believe there is any harm in telling you. It makes very little sense to myself. The prophecy was about 4 individuals, I think, who are expected to help break the current stalemate. It went like this: she lifted a hand, and counted off each of the 4. Mankind's emperor, to draw out the final enemy. The vow, to hold the vessel in place. A god's wrath, to break the cycle. And the heir apparent, to take the throne left behind. I whistled. The mites told you that? You're right that it makes no sense. That was some heavy stuff on her shoulders. Deathless really deal with higher stakes than any of us lowly mortals work with. I was told I was one of the 4, however I'm not sure which. Or at the very least, a contender to be one of the 4. Mankind's emperor. I threw out, you're deathless and clearly strong enough to hold a crown. Hecate shook her head. No, I have reasons to believe that isn't likely. I believe I am the god's wrath, sent to break the cycle. Does make sense with how much you want to get both machines and humans to work together. Sounds like a way to break the cycle. Though that part sounds more violent, wrath would point to a fight of some kind and you've tried everything you can to avoid that. Hecate shrugged. Peace has historically always required a war to establish or protect it. This may be no different. Well, if I can help you out in any way with that, let me know. I'm just a simple surface knight in the scale of all this, but friends help each other out. We are friends now? She asked. I gave her a deadpan glance and raised an eyebrow. Well, there is that whole "you saved my life" bit, that went a long way. She smiled then, a small thing that slowly widened. Don't expect a paycheck though. I never signed any papers. Hecate quirked her head, not understanding for a moment, before lightening up once again. Oh, I understand. You are referencing what you said before about paying for freen. I shushed her, one finger scolding her. If I had a spray bottle, I'd be using that, but sometimes you need to work with what you have. Never explain jokes. I said. The moment you explain why something is funny, it ceases to be funny. Cardinal rule. She nodded attentively. Then, humor is similar to quantum mechanics? Where observing the waveform causes the form to collapse. What? The who what now? What's a quantum mechanic do? More undersider jargon? Quantum mechanics is a fundamental theory in physics that provides a description of the physical properties of nature at the scale of atoms and subatomic particles. She said, with perfect conviction, like she was reading from memory. Hold on. You're saying, I said, slowly. There's an entire field of mechanical engineering that I don't know about, all dedicated to when things get really small. Yes. No hesitation. No excited head bob. Just a standard factual answer. Small things began to click in my head once again. Clues I'd failed to notice piling up on one another. How Hecate had known everything about trap making right down to the optimal positions, as if she'd read and memorized an entire book on the subject. Her odd mannerisms, reminiscent of some of the reachers I'd worked with who were obsessive about certain topics and usually ended up being experts at their passion. Some could outright remember everything they'd ever read, and how she remembered every detail she saw or heard without issue. And Deathless had access to all the books and knowledge they could find. Lord Atius himself had been well known to have been a scholar. Only made sense other Deathless were like that too. She's pulling the suit over me, this has to be bait. This couldn't possibly be more bait even if it had my favorite numbers scribbled over it. But when has this has to be a trap ever stopped me from sticking my foot where it doesn't belong? All right, tell me more. I asked, pulling the proverbial lever. Hecate, as always, gave a straight answer. I'd considered her a by-the-books type of person, but I'd been wrong. I'd been terribly, horribly, wrong. Hecate wasn't by the book. She was the entire book. And the cover, library slate, ladders, chairs, desk, bathrooms, and the overworked receptionist all put together. Either her imagination was vivid beyond my wildest dreams, in which case I didn't want to wake up because I'd officially gotten to the good parts, or the girl had edict memory and spent years in a library sucking up every bit of knowledge that could be found. No wonder she's so strange in every other regard. All her mental space was dedicated to hoarding knowledge. While the power cells slowly recharged one by one, I talked shop with Hecate and time flew by. As I discovered, it was even better than edict memory. Hecate didn't just remember every book she'd read, she understood it all perfectly as well, making her an expert. It didn't end at quantum mechanics either. Any topic I could think of she seemed to know about. Anything. Hydroponics. Aerogeol engineering. Mathematics. Literature. History. Even the gods' damned internet of old. And a dozen other topics. I could ask for the most random items possible, and she'd know something about it. The only limits were around the surface clan and culture. She didn't know how environmental suits functioned, for example, or best methods of maintaining machinery against the sub-zero temperature outside. It was like a glaring hole in her stupidly huge knowledge. She did take a few excellent guesses, and outright reverse-engineered how a basic Evo suit would work with minimum assumptions. Ridiculous. I'd kidnap her to the surface if I wasn't so convinced she'd beat me to a pulp and leave me tied up to a tree with my own ropes. Calm down, Keith. I mentally warned myself, slapping some sense into myself. She's an immortal demigod on the level of clan lords. You're a random surface barbarian she happened to cross paths with and decided to save on account of old pay-it-forward debts. Not to mention she was on a mission set by gods more powerful than Tsuya. Technically, I was also on a mission set by a god, but it was a far more mundane one. That said, there was a similarity. Hecate had to speak with mites, and I had something that Tsuya had called a mite seeker, hidden away back home. She said in the audio recording that the mites played both sides, and at some point likely hid a weapon of some kind from her sight. The mite seeker might be a way to communicate with them? Tsuya had stressed to me that the mites were the key. Was she talking about this prophecy? I could tell Hecate about this, maybe she'd have use of that seeker? Or was I just telling myself that in order to find a reason to stick around? After the first cell was charged, I took a moment and started on the process to repair Journey. I'd seen Father do it before, sacrificing material and power in order to fuel the process. Mite-made material couldn't be used, but organic material was perfectly edible, and there were a lot of roots, mushrooms and foliage all snaking around the tunnels. I just had to take a break from all the math talk to hunt down enough material. Walking back into the destroyed church, I found the immortal demigod, instrument of the mites with a holy mission to change the world itself, still sitting politely on the bench, waiting for me. Large diagrams and numbers scribbled out in the dirt in front of her from the last topic we'd debated about. A little surreal to think about. Time flew by as the two of us talked a little about everything. Up until a beep filled the room, and the last of the power cells had been fully charged. By that point, Journey had repaired itself completely, and a new helmet sat on the bench, being polished up by a small river of black mist, happily eating away at drops of power cell liquid and cut-up roots. Hecate turned her gaze to the fountain, pausing her current lecture. The rest can be explained at another time. I worry the Drake has summoned additional reinforcements in the intermittent. We should attempt to pacify the Drake and escape this section quickly. Right. Priorities. I said, putting in false cheer to mask the hollow feeling of realizing all of this has to end eventually. Time to deal with the lizard, and then we're home free and can go about our business again. Great! I grabbed my helmet, lifted it up and let it drop down into place. Kathina's voice came online the moment everything booted up. First thing she did was scream at me, of course. I expected that part, but what I hadn't expected was that her screaming was an actual serious warning. Turns out, relic armors talk and communicate with each other constantly. It's expected and part of how they function. And as Journey had found out, Hecate's armor was not relic armor.